The lock snapped in his hand before he even understood what he was holding. A black velvet box, hidden behind a stack of old medical files in Elena's closet. Inside it, a single photograph. Grainy. Gray and white. A small, curled shape glowing faintly on dark film. Adrian Valenti stood frozen in the doorway of her apartment, his breath gone, his empire forgotten, his hands trembling for the first time in 15 years. "Elena," his voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" She stood across the room, pale, unable to speak, watching the most feared man in New York fall apart over a piece of paper that changed everything. Before we continue, if this story has already grabbed your heart in the first 30 seconds, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the very last word, because what happens between Adrian and Elena tonight will break you and heal you in the same breath. And tell me, which city are you watching from right now? I read every single comment, and I want to know exactly how far this story has traveled tonight. Now, let's go back to the beginning, back to the night that started it all. Elena's hands were shaking, but her voice was not. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I swear to you, Adrian, I was going to tell you." "When?" His voice was low, dangerous, but underneath the danger there was something else, something raw. "When were you going to tell me, Elena, before she turned 1, before she turned 5, before she asked me why I was never there? You don't understand." "Then make me understand." The words exploded out of him louder than she had ever heard him speak. Adrian Valenti did not raise his voice. Men who raised their voices around him ended up disappearing. But here he was, standing in her small apartment, holding an ultrasound photo in a hand that had signed death warrants, and he was shaking. Elena pressed her back against the wall. Arms crossed over her stomach, as if she could still protect the child that had already been born, already had a name, already had her father's eyes. "You didn't want this," she whispered. "You didn't want any of this." "You don't get to decide what I want," Adrian said. "You don't get to make that choice for me." Silence swallowed the room. 2 years. 2 years of silence, of secrets, of a truth buried so deep that Elena had almost convinced herself she had imagined the whole thing. But she hadn't imagined it. None of it. Not the night that started everything. Not the fear that followed it. Not the tiny heartbeat that had changed the direction of her entire life. To understand how they arrived at this moment in this apartment with an ultrasound photo trembling between them, it was necessary to go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the first time Elena Moretti walked into the private clinic owned by the Valenti family and met the man everyone warned her never to trust. 2 years earlier, Elena had been a 26-year-old medical assistant, working double shifts at a public hospital in Brooklyn, exhausted, underpaid, and drowning in student debt from nursing school. When a private recruiter offered her triple her salary to work exclusively at a discreet family clinic in Manhattan, she should have asked more questions. She should have wondered why a family needed a full-time private medical staff. She should have wondered why the interview took place in a black car with tinted windows instead of an office. But rent was due, and her mother's medical bills back in Ohio were due, and Elena Moretti had learned a long time ago that desperate people did not have the luxury of asking too many questions. "You'll treat minor injuries, manage prescriptions, and maintain complete confidentiality," the recruiter had told her. His name was Dominic, and he had eyes that missed nothing. "Whatever you see in that clinic stays in that clinic. Do you understand?" "I understand," Elena had said, even though she didn't, not yet. Her first week at the clinic, she treated 3 men with gunshot wounds and told no one. Her second week, she stitched a laceration on a man's face while he calmly discussed business on the phone as if she wasn't holding a needle 2 inches from his eye. By her third week, she had stopped asking questions entirely because the answers terrified her more than the silence did. And then, on a Tuesday night in late autumn, Adrian Valenti walked into his own clinic with blood soaking through his shirt, and everything changed. "Sit down," Elena said, not even looking up from the tray of supplies she was preparing. Now, nobody spoke to Adrian Valenti that way. The 2 men who had helped him inside froze, waiting for an explosion that never came. Adrian looked at the small woman with tired eyes and steady hands, and something flickered across his face that might have been surprise. "I said, sit down," Elena repeated, finally looking at him. "You're bleeding on my floor." Adrian sat. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound along his ribs, her fingers quick and precise, despite the tremor she was fighting to hide. She had heard the stories. Everyone in the organization had heard the stories. Adrian Valenti was not a man you turned your back on. Adrian Valenti was not a man who forgave mistakes. "You're new," he said finally, his voice low, watching her work. 3 weeks. "And you're not afraid of me." Elena paused, needle in hand, and looked up at him directly. Something almost nobody in that building dared to do. "I'm terrified of you," she said honestly. "But you're also bleeding, and if I don't finish this stitch, you're going to lose more blood than you can afford to lose. So which matters more to you right now, my fear or your life?" For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. Then quietly, almost like he had forgotten how he laughed. It was a small sound, rusty, unused, but it was real. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena." "Elena," he repeated like he was testing the shape of it. "Finish the stitch, Elena." That should have been the end of it. A single strange conversation between a mafia boss and his newest medical assistant, forgotten by morning. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Over the following months, Adrian found reasons to come to the clinic that had nothing to do with injuries. He would appear in the doorway while Elena was restocking supplies, lean against the frame, and ask about her day like he was any other man, not the head of one of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast. "You don't have to keep checking on me," Elena told him one evening months into this strange routine. "I promise I'm not stealing your morphine." "I know you're not," Adrian said. "I have people who would already know if you were." "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked at her the way he looked at very few things in his life, weighing, calculating, deciding whether to be honest. "Because this is the only place in my life where nobody is afraid of me," he finally said, "and I didn't realize how much I needed that until I found it." Elena's chest tightened at those words, at the vulnerability buried inside a man everyone believed had none. She had heard the rumors about his childhood. Everyone had. A father who ruled through fear and fists, a mother who disappeared when Adrian was 7 years old, an empire inherited too young by a boy who had never been allowed to be a child. "That's a sad thing to admit," Elena said softly. "It's a sadder thing to live," Adrian replied. She saw him differently after that conversation. She saw the man underneath the monster, the boy who had built walls so high that nobody could reach the person hiding behind them. And slowly, carefully, without either of them fully admitting it, those walls began to crack whenever Elena was near. She saw him show mercy to a low-level soldier who had made a costly mistake, quietly paying for the man's daughter's surgery, instead of ordering the punishment everyone expected. She saw him sit with an elderly employee's grieving widow for 2 hours, saying almost nothing, simply being present so she wouldn't have to be alone. She saw him late one night sitting outside the clinic, staring at nothing, and when she asked if he was okay, he said only, "I don't know how to be anything other than what they made me." "Maybe you don't have to be," Elena had whispered. He looked at her like she had said something impossible. The charity gala took place on a cold night in early spring, a lavish event the Valenti family hosted every year as a front-of-performance of legitimacy for a business built on shadows. Elena wasn't supposed to attend. Medical staff didn't attend galas. But Dominic had insisted she be present in case anything went wrong, and so she found herself standing at the edge of a glittering ballroom in a borrowed dress watching Adrian Valenti work the room like a king surveying his kingdom. He found her near the terrace doors an hour into the event. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," Adrian said. "I would," Elena admitted. "I don't belong here." "Neither do I," he said, surprising her. "Everyone in this room is pretending. The politicians pretend they don't take my money. The businessmen pretend they don't need my protection, and I pretend I care about any of it. Then why do it?" Because it's easier than admitting what I actually want. Elena's heart was pounding, and she hated how much she wanted to ask him what that was. And what do you actually want, Adrian? He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the storm behind his dark eyes, close enough that the noise of the gala faded into nothing. Right now, he said quietly, I want to walk out of here with you, and I want to remember just for one night what it feels like to be a person instead of a name people fear. She should have said no. She should have remembered Dominic's warning, the danger of getting close to a man like Adrian Valenti. But 2 years of loneliness and 1 moment of honest connection was more powerful than any warning. And when Adrian reached for her hand, Elena did not pull away. They left the gala together an hour later, slipping out through a side entrance while the party continued without them. What happened between them that night was not something either of them had planned. It was 2 lonely people finding comfort in each other, finding a kind of honesty neither of them had experienced in years, holding on to something soft in a world built entirely of hard edges. For a few hours, Adrian was not a mafia boss, and Elena was not his employee. They were simply 2 people who had found unexpectedly a moment of peace. I haven't felt like this in a long time. Adrian admitted quietly, his walls lower than Elena had ever seen them. Like what? She asked. Like myself, he said. Like the person I might have been if my life had gone differently. Elena fell asleep that night, believing something had shifted permanently between them. She woke up the next morning to a conversation that shattered that belief completely. She had stepped out of the bedroom to find water, and she heard Adrian's voice from the next room, low, speaking to Dominic on the phone. It doesn't mean anything, Adrian was saying. You know how it is with me. It happens. It doesn't change anything. Elena froze in the hallway, her chest tightening painfully. Vanessa was different, Adrian continued, his voice tired. This isn't that. This isn't anything close to that. Don't make it into something it's not. Elena didn't wait to hear more. She didn't know who Vanessa was, didn't know the full context of the conversation, didn't know that Adrian was actually defending her, insisting to a skeptical Dominic that Elena wasn't a liability, that what happened between them mattered, that comparing her to his manipulative ex-fiancée Vanessa was insulting to both of them. All Elena heard was, it doesn't mean anything, and it happens, and her heart, which had opened for the first time in years, slammed shut instantly. She was dressed and gone before Adrian finished his call. For 3 weeks after that morning, Elena avoided him entirely, requesting reassignment to the clinic's overnight shift so their paths would never cross. Adrian noticed. Adrian noticed everything. He asked Dominic what happened. Asked why Elena suddenly couldn't look at him, but Dominic didn't know either, and Adrian, a man who commanded fear from hundreds of dangerous men, found himself completely powerless in the face of one woman's silence. Then, 5 weeks later, Elena stood alone in a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away from the clinic, staring down at a small plastic stick that would change the entire direction of her life. Positive. She sat down on the edge of the bathtub in her apartment, staring at the wall, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every possible danger. She thought about Adrian's world, a world of enemies and violence and constant threat. She thought about the conversation she had overheard, the casual dismissal in his voice. She thought about children of powerful men she had read about, kidnapped for ransom, used as leverage, born into danger they never chose. And she thought about her own mother, who had spent Elena's entire childhood being controlled by a man who claimed to love her, a man who used every ounce of power he had to keep her small, afraid, and dependent. Elena made a decision that night, sitting alone on the edge of a bathtub with tears streaming down her face. She would not become her mother. She would not raise a child inside a world of fear controlled by a man who saw the pregnancy as an obligation rather than a choice. She would protect this baby the only way she knew how. She would do it alone. She requested a transfer out of the Valenti organization entirely 2 weeks later, citing family issues back in Ohio. Dominic, suspicious but unable to prove anything, approved it reluctantly. Adrian was in Chicago, handling business when the transfer was finalized, and by the time he returned, Elena Moretti was gone. Her apartment empty. Her phone disconnected, every trace of her erased as thoroughly as she could manage. He searched for her. Of course he searched for her. A man with his resources could have found almost anyone. But Elena had learned enough during her time inside his world to know how to disappear. And Adrian, for reasons he didn't fully understand himself, eventually stopped looking, telling himself it was for the best. Telling himself that whatever had happened between them had simply run its course. He didn't know about the ultrasound sitting in a locked box in a small apartment 40 minutes away. He didn't know about the daughter growing inside the woman who had once made him laugh for the first time in years. He didn't know that somewhere in the city, a little girl with his eyes was learning to crawl, learning to smile, learning to say her first word, all without ever knowing her father existed. For 2 years, Elena built a quiet life in the shadows of a city controlled by the man she had once loved. She worked as a nurse under a different last name at a small clinic in Queens, using the skills she had gained inside the Valenti organization to support herself and her daughter. She named the baby Sophia, after her closest friend, the only person in the world who knew the entire truth. "You have to tell him eventually," Sophia had said countless times over those 2 years holding baby Sophia, while Elena worked exhausting overnight shifts. "That little girl has his eyes, Elena. Everyone who sees her is going to know exactly who her father is." "He doesn't want this," Elena always replied. "He made that clear." "Did he?" Sophia pressed. "Or did you hear one conversation and decide the ending before he ever got the chance to write it?" Elena never had a good answer for that question, because deep down, she knew Sophia might be right, and that possibility terrified her more than anything else. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her disappearance had changed Adrian Valenti in ways nobody around him understood. He became more guarded, more isolated, throwing himself into expanding his empire with a ruthlessness that even his own men found unsettling. He stopped attending galas. He stopped pretending to enjoy anything. He became, in the words of the men who served him, a ghost wearing the face of a king. Dominic tried more than once to ask what had happened. "Nothing happened," Adrian always said. "People leave. It happens." But late at night, alone in the enormous empty house he had inherited from a father he despised, Adrian would sometimes find himself thinking about a small clinic and a woman who wasn't afraid of him, wondering what he had done wrong. Wondering why the one person who had ever made him feel human had vanished without a single word. He never imagined the truth. He never imagined that somewhere across the city, a piece of himself was growing up without him. A daughter who would one day ask her mother why she didn't have a father like the other children. The collision between these two separate worlds began on an ordinary Tuesday, nearly 2 years after Elena disappeared, when Marco Bellini, the ambitious head of a rival family who had spent years searching for any weakness he could exploit against Adrian Valenti, received an anonymous tip that changed everything. "There's a woman," the informant told Marco, a low-level contact who had once worked security at Adrian's old clinic and recognized Elena from a chance encounter on the subway. "Used to work for Valenti's people. She's got a kid, a little girl maybe a year and a half old. Kids got Valenti's eyes, boss. I'd know them anywhere." Marco Bellini smiled slowly, the kind of smile that promised nothing good for anyone involved. "Find her," he ordered. "Find everything about her, and do not let Valenti know we're looking." 2 days later, a man Elena had never seen before began appearing near Sophia's daycare pickup, watching from a parked car across the street, photographing Elena and her daughter with a long lens camera. Elena noticed him on the 3rd day, her instincts from years inside the Valenti organization screaming that something was wrong. Her hands shook as she scooped Sophia into her arms and hurried home a different route than usual, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, her heart pounding with a fear she hadn't felt in 2 years. That night, unable to sleep, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Elena made a decision that terrified her more than anything had in a very long time. She called Dominic, by UN. She didn't know if the number would even still work, didn't know if he would even answer, but 2 years of silence suddenly felt insignificant compared to the fear pulsing through her chest. Dominic answered on the second ring. "Elena." His voice was sharp with surprise. "Is this really you?" "I need your help," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I think someone is watching me. I think someone knows about—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Knows about what, Elena?" Dominic's voice grew serious, sharp with the instincts of a man who had spent his entire career protecting the Valenti family from exactly this kind of threat. Elena closed her eyes, 2 years of secrets pressing down on her all at once. "Adrian has a daughter," she whispered. "She's almost 2 years old. And I think Marco Bellini just found out." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Elena thought the call had dropped. "Where are you?" Dominic finally asked, his voice tight with urgency. "Do not move. Do not go anywhere. I'm sending a car right now." 20 minutes later, blacked-out SUVs surrounded Elena's small apartment building, and for the first time in 2 years, she found herself back inside the dangerous, powerful world she had run so hard to escape. Except this time, she wasn't alone. This time, a sleeping toddler with dark curls and unmistakable dark eyes was strapped into a car seat beside her, completely unaware that her existence had just triggered a war between two of the most powerful crime families in New York. Adrian was in a meeting when Dominic burst through the door without knocking, something he had never once done in 15 years of service. "We have a problem," Dominic said, his face pale. "What kind of problem?" Adrian asked, already sensing that whatever this was, it was different from the usual threats and complications of their world. Dominic hesitated, and in that hesitation, Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. "It's Elena," Dominic said finally. "She's here. She's downstairs. And Adrian, there's something you need to see before you go down there. Something she's been hiding from you for 2 years. Adrian's entire body went still, every instinct screaming that whatever came next would change the rest of his life. "Show me," he said quietly. Dominic pulled out his phone, hands unsteady, and turned the screen toward his boss. A photograph taken just 20 minutes earlier by one of the men who had escorted Elena into the building. A little girl asleep, her small face turned toward the camera. Dark curls falling across her forehead, and a pair of eyes that Adrian Valenti recognized instantly because he saw those exact eyes every single morning when he looked in the mirror. The phone slipped from Adrian's fingers and clattered to the floor. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where is Elena right now?" "Downstairs," Dominic said. "Adrian, wait." But Adrian was already moving, already walking faster than Dominic had ever seen him walk down the hallway. Down the stairs, his mind refusing to process what he had just seen, refusing to accept it, needing to see it with his own eyes before he could allow himself to believe it. He found Elena standing in the main hall of the building he had once brought her to after a gunshot wound, standing in almost the exact same spot where he had first heard her tell him to sit down, terrified but resolute, holding a sleeping child against her chest. For a long, endless moment, neither of them spoke. Adrian's eyes moved from Elena's face to the small, sleeping face pressed against her shoulder, and something inside him, something that had been frozen for 2 years, cracked wide open. "Is she—" His voice failed him completely. Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Her name is Sophia," she whispered. "She's almost 2. The math wasn't complicated. Adrian had known Elena for exactly 2 years and 3 months. He did the calculation in half a second, and the moment he understood the full weight of the truth crashed down on him. Something in his expression shattered completely. 2 years, he said, his voice shaking with an emotion he had spent his entire adult life refusing to show anyone. "You've had my daughter for 2 years, and you never told me. Adrian, please let me explain." "Explain what?" His voice cracked, rising despite himself, despite 15 years of careful control. "Explain how you decided all by yourself that I didn't deserve to know my own child existed. Explain how you let me spend 2 years thinking you just disappeared, thinking maybe I did something so unforgivable that you couldn't even say goodbye." "I heard you," Elena said, tears finally spilling over. "The morning after the gala, I heard you on the phone with Dominic. I heard you say it didn't mean anything that it happens, that I wasn't anything like Vanessa. Like that comparison somehow made it worse. I thought, you thought I didn't care?" Adrian finished, understanding dawning across his face in real time. "Elena, I wasn't dismissing you. I was defending you. Dominic thought I'd made a mistake being with you, that it was dangerous, that you'd become a liability. I was telling him he was wrong, that what happened between us actually meant something more than he could understand." Elena's entire body went rigid with shock. "That's not what it sounded like." "You didn't stay long enough to hear the whole conversation," Adrian said, and there was no anger in his voice now, only devastation. "You heard 4 sentences and disappeared for 2 years, and in that time I have a daughter I never got to meet. A daughter who is going to grow up wondering why her father wasn't there. Do you understand what you took from me, Elena? Do you understand what you took from her?" Little Sophia stirred against Elena's shoulder, her dark eyes fluttering open, the exact same eyes as the man standing in front of her, though neither of them had ever met. Adrian froze completely, watching his daughter wake up for the very first time in his presence. "Can I?" His voice broke entirely. "Can I hold her?" Elena hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, placing their daughter carefully into the trembling arms of the most feared man in New York, a man who had never once in his adult life allowed himself to appear this vulnerable in front of anyone. Adrian stared down at his daughter's face, and something inside him that had been broken since childhood, since watching his mother walk away, since inheriting a life built on violence and fear, began for the very first time to heal. "Hi," he whispered, his voice thick with tears he refused to acknowledge were falling. "Hi, Sophia. I'm your dad." Sophia looked up at the stranger holding her, studied his face with the serious concentration only small children possess, and then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Elena watched the moment unfold in front of her, watched 2 years of fear and secrecy collapse in an instant, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Hope. But that fragile moment of connection was shattered seconds later when Dominic burst back into the hall, his face pale with urgency, a phone pressed against his ear. "Adrian?" Dominic said, his voice sharp with alarm. "We have a serious problem. Marco Bellini's men were spotted outside Elena's building 20 minutes ago. And Adrian, they weren't watching. They were preparing to move." The warmth in the room evaporated instantly. Adrian's arms tightened protectively around his daughter, his eyes hardening into the expression of the man everyone in the city feared. "Lock down the building," he said, his voice dropping into something cold and lethal. "Nobody in or out. And get me everything we know about what Marco Bellini has planned, because if he thinks he can use my daughter against me, he's about to learn exactly why people are afraid of my name." Elena's blood ran cold. "Adrian, what's happening? Who is Marco Bellini?" Adrian looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for the 2 people standing in front of him. "He's a man who has spent years waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity," Adrian said quietly. "And now that he knows about Sophia, he's not going to stop until he finds a way to use her against me." Somewhere across the city, in a dimly lit office overlooking the harbor, Marco Bellini smiled at the photograph on his desk, a photograph of a little girl with familiar dark eyes, and began making a phone call that would set the next devastating chapter of Adrian and Elena's story into motion. Dominic's men moved fast, sealing every entrance of the compound within 90 seconds, guns drawn but hidden beneath jackets, eyes scanning every window, every rooftop, every parked car on the block. Adrian stood in the center of the main hall, with his daughter still in his arms, and for the first time in 15 years, the calculating king of New York's underworld felt something close to panic. "Give her to me," Elena said, reaching for Sophia. "Adrian, give her to me now." He hesitated only a fraction of a second before placing their daughter carefully back into Elena's arms, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary, as if letting go of her felt like losing something he had only just found. "Take them to the safe floor." Adrian ordered, his voice sharp, commanding the voice of a man who had spent his entire life being obeyed instantly. "Nobody gets near this building without my direct authorization. I want eyes on every exit, every rooftop within 4 blocks, and I want to know the second Bellini's men make a move." "Adrian." Dominic's voice cut through the chaos, urgent low. "There's something else. The men outside, they're not just watching anymore. One of the vehicles just repositioned. They're setting up a perimeter of their own." Elena's arms tightened around Sophia so hard the little girl began to whimper. "What does that mean?" Adrian's jaw locked. "It means they're not here to gather information anymore. They're here to take something." The words hit Elena like ice water down her spine. "Take her. They're here to take Sophia." "They won't get the chance," Adrian said, and something in his voice made Elena believe him completely, even as terror clawed through her chest. He turned to Dominic. "Get the car around to the underground entrance. We're moving them now before Bellini's men decide to stop pretending they're just watching." "Adrian, wait." Elena's voice cracked. "You can't just make this decision without telling me what's happening. I have spent 2 years protecting her by myself. I am not going to hand her life over to you without understanding what you're walking us into." For a moment something flickered across Adrian's face, frustration warring with the desperate need to simply get his family somewhere safe. He forced himself to slow down, to look at her the way he used to look at her in the clinic, when she was the only person in his world who wasn't afraid of him. "Marco Bellini has spent 6 years trying to find a weakness he can use against me," Adrian said, quieter now, though the urgency never left his voice. "Every time he's failed. I don't drink too much. I don't gamble. I don't have a wife or children he could threaten. I made myself untouchable because I made sure there was nothing in my life anyone could take from me." His eyes moved to Sophia, still crying softly against Elena's shoulder. "Until now." "So this is my fault," Elena whispered. "No." Adrian's answer came instantly firmly. "This is Bellini's fault for being a coward who attacks families instead of fighting men directly. But it means we don't have the luxury of arguing about this in a hallway. We need to move Elena. Now." A radio crackled against Dominic's hip, and the voice that came through it made every man in the hallway go still. "Boss, we've got a vehicle attempting to breach the north checkpoint. Black SUV, no plates, drivers refusing to stop." Adrian's entire body shifted, the warmth that had briefly returned to his eyes, hardening instantly into something cold and dangerous. "Do not let that vehicle inside the perimeter," he said into the radio. "Whatever it takes." Elena's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Sophia had stopped crying and was staring up at her mother with wide, frightened eyes, sensing the tension without understanding its cause. "It's okay, baby," Elena whispered, though her voice shook with the lie. "Mommy's got you." The radio crackled again, tenser this time. "Vehicle is not slowing down. Repeat, vehicle is not slowing down. Get them downstairs now!" Adrian barked at Dominic, already moving, already positioning himself between Elena and the front entrance, like a human wall. "I don't care what it takes. Get them to the safe floor." Dominic grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her toward a side corridor, but Elena resisted for one desperate second, looking back at Adrian. "What about you?" "I'm not going anywhere," Adrian said, his voice final. "Go." The sound that followed was not a gunshot, not an explosion, but the screech of tires and a heavy metallic crash from somewhere beyond the compound gates, followed instantly by shouting, followed by the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Elena froze in the corridor, every instinct screaming at her to run back toward Adrian, toward the danger, toward the only man who had ever made her feel like she wasn't facing the world completely alone. "Move," Dominic said firmly, pulling her forward again. "He can handle this. Your job right now is her." Elena looked down at Sophia's terrified face, and something inside her steadied instantly. The same instinct that had carried her through 2 years of raising this child alone taking over completely. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's go." They descended 2 flights of stairs into a reinforced lower level. Elena hadn't known existed a space with steel doors and bulletproof glass clearly built for exactly this kind of emergency. Dominic sealed the door behind them, checked the monitors mounted along the wall, and finally exhaled. "They stopped the vehicle at the gate," he said, relief evident in his voice. "It was a decoy. Two men unarmed meant to draw attention while the real team assessed our response time." He looked at Elena, something sharper entering his expression. "Bellini isn't playing games, Elena. That was a test. He wanted to see how fast Adrian would react, how strong the perimeter is. Next time, it won't be a decoy." Elena sank into a chair. Sophia clutched against her chest, her entire body trembling with adrenaline finally catching up to her. "This is insane," she whispered. 2 hours ago, my biggest worry was getting Sophia to daycare on time. "I know this is a lot," Dominic said, his voice gentler than Elena had ever heard it. "But you did the right thing calling me. If you had waited even one more day, if Bellini's men had gathered enough information before we intervened, this could have ended very differently." Elena's stomach twisted at the implication. "You mean they could have taken her?" Dominic didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Nearly 20 minutes passed before the steel door opened again, and Adrian walked through it, his shirt collar torn a shallow cut above his eyebrow, but otherwise unharmed. Elena stood so fast, Sophia startled in her arms. "You're hurt," she said, crossing the room instantly. "It's nothing," Adrian said, though he didn't stop her when she reached up and gently touched the cut above his eye. "You could have been killed." "I've had worse." "That's not the point, Adrian." Elena's voice cracked with an emotion that surprised even her, something between fear and fury and a desperate, unwanted relief that he was standing in front of her alive. "2 hours ago, I found out you know about Sophia. Now there are men trying to break into a building because of her. Do you understand how terrifying this is for me?" "Yes," Adrian said simply, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand exactly how terrifying it is, because for the last hour, all I could think about was what would happen if Bellini's men got past that gate before I got the two of you underground. I have fought wars, Elena. I have faced men with guns pointed directly at my chest without flinching. But watching you disappear down that hallway with my daughter, not knowing if I would see either of you again, that was the first time in 15 years I have ever been afraid." The rawness in his voice disarmed her completely, and for a moment the anger drained out of her, replaced by something softer, something that had never fully left, despite 2 years and an ocean of secrets between them. "I'm putting a full security detail on you starting tonight." Adrian continued, his voice regaining its usual authority. 6 men rotating shifts around the clock. I'm having your apartment evaluated for immediate relocation to somewhere more secure. And Stop. Elena's voice was quiet but firm, cutting through his rapid instructions completely. "Just stop for a second." Adrian blinked clearly, unaccustomed to being interrupted mid-command by anyone. "Elena, this isn't a negotiation. Bellini has already shown me tonight what he's capable of. I am not taking chances with your safety or hers." "I understand that you're scared," Elena said, holding Sophia a little tighter. "I am too. But you cannot just walk into my life after 2 years and start making every decision for me like I'm one of your soldiers waiting for orders. I'm trying to protect you. I know that." Elena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "But do you understand what it felt like growing up watching my mother get controlled by a man who told her every single decision was for her own protection? He decided where she could go. He decided who she could talk to. He decided what she wore, who her friends were, how she spent every hour of her day. And he told her every single time that it was because he loved her, because he was protecting her. I spent my entire childhood watching that woman disappear a little more every single year until there was nothing left of who she used to be." Her voice broke completely. "I will not become her Adrian. I will not let Sophia grow up watching that happen to me." The room went completely silent. Even Dominic, standing near the monitors, seemed to understand this was a moment that required his absence, and he quietly stepped out, leaving Adrian and Elena alone with their daughter for the first time since the truth had shattered everything. Adrian's expression had shifted entirely, the commanding authority replaced by something far more uncertain. "Elena, I would never. You don't know that. Elena interrupted gently but firmly. You have spent your entire life being obeyed. You give orders and people follow them because that's the only way your world works. But I am not one of your soldiers, and Sophia is not a piece of your empire that needs securing. If we are going to be part of your life, I need you to understand something right now before this goes any further. What do you need me to understand? Elena took a breath, steadying herself. I don't need a protector who owns my life, Adrian. I need a partner who stands beside me. There's a difference, and it matters more than you realize. The words hit him harder than any bullet ever had. Adrian sat down slowly across from her, his usual composure completely gone, replaced by something raw and searching. Nobody has ever spoken to me the way you just did, he admitted quietly. Not once in my entire life. Maybe that's part of the problem, Elena said softer now. I don't know how to do this, Adrian confessed, and the honesty in his voice was almost startling coming from a man everyone believed was incapable of vulnerability. I don't know how to be a partner. I don't know how to be a father. Everything I know about family I learned from a man who used fear to control everyone around him, including his own son. I swore I would never become him. But right now, sitting here, all I want to do is lock you both away somewhere. No one can ever reach you. And I don't know if that instinct is protection, or if it's exactly the same thing my father used to justify controlling my mother. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy and honest in a way neither of them had expected. That's the first time you've ever admitted something like that to me, Elena said quietly. I've never had a reason to before, Adrian replied. I never had anything worth being honest about losing. Sophia, sensing the shift in the room, reached one small hand toward Adrian, her fingers opening and closing in the universal gesture of a toddler wanting attention. Adrian looked at her startled before slowly, carefully extending his own hand until Sophia's tiny fingers wrapped around one of his. She's not afraid of you, Elena said softly, watching the moment unfold. No, Adrian said, his voice thick. She's the only person in this city who isn't. For a moment, something peaceful settled over the room, fragile and new, the first genuine connection between the three of them since the truth had exploded into the open. But peace in Adrian Valenti's world never lasted long. Dominic reappeared in the doorway, his face grim. Adrian, you need to see this. Adrian rose instantly, his protective instincts flaring again. What is it? Dominic held up his phone, a video paused on the screen. Security footage from the North checkpoint. I want you to look at the man who was driving the decoy vehicle. Adrian took the phone, pressed play, and watched the grainy footage of a man being restrained by his security team. The moment the man's face turned toward the camera, Adrian's entire expression changed. That's Ricky Torres, he said slowly, disbelief creeping into his voice. He worked security on this floor for 3 years. He did, Dominic confirmed grimly. Which means Bellini didn't find Elena through random surveillance or luck. Someone inside this organization gave him the information. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Elena's eyes widened. Someone you trust has been feeding information to the man trying to hurt us. It appears that way, Dominic said. Adrian's jaw tightened, the warmth that had briefly softened his face, hardening back into the cold, calculating expression of a man preparing for war. Bring Torres to the interrogation room. I want to know exactly who he's been talking to, and I want to know how long this has been happening. Adrian. Elena's voice was cautious now. What exactly happens in an interrogation room? Adrian looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something in his eyes she genuinely didn't recognize. Something that reminded her uncomfortably of the reputation that had followed him for years. The reputation she had always managed to avoid witnessing firsthand. I need answers, Elena, he said quietly. Someone betrayed this family, someone who had access to information about you and Sophia. I intend to find out exactly who else knows, and I intend to make sure it never happens again. That doesn't answer my question. Adrian's silence was answer enough, and Elena felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with the danger outside the building. "I need to go," Adrian said, already moving toward the door. "Dominic will stay with you and Sophia until I'm finished. You're both safe down here." "Adrian, wait." Elena stood Sophia balanced on her hip. "Whatever you're about to do, remember what I said earlier. You told me you're afraid of becoming your father. This is exactly the moment that decision gets made." Adrian paused at the doorway, his back to her, his shoulders tense. "I'm not going to hurt an innocent man," he said finally. "But I am not going to pretend I run a business where consequences don't exist. There's a difference, Elena, between cruelty and accountability, even if it doesn't always look that way from the outside." He left before she could respond, and Elena was left standing in the reinforced room with Dominic and her daughter. The fragile peace of moments earlier, replaced entirely by a fear that ran deeper than the threat outside. "Is he going to hurt that man?" Elena asked Dominic quietly. Dominic considered his answer carefully. "Adrian has rules most people in this business don't have," he said. "He doesn't tolerate cruelty for its own sake. But loyalty is the only currency that matters in our world, and betrayal has consequences. What those consequences look like, that's between Adrian and the man who chose to sell out this family." It wasn't a comforting answer, but Elena understood it was the only honest one she was going to get. 2 floors above them, in a room with no windows and a single overhead light, Adrian stood across from Ricky Torres, a man he had personally hired 3 years earlier after Torres's own father, an old associate of the family, had vouched for his loyalty. "I trusted you," Adrian said quietly, his voice more dangerous in its calm than it would have been if he'd shouted. "I put you on this floor because your father spent 20 years serving this family with honor. And you used that trust to sell information about a 2-year-old child to Marco Bellini." Torres's face was pale sweat beading along his hairline. "It wasn't like that, Adrian, I swear." "Then tell me what it was like," Adrian said, leaning against the table, his eyes never leaving Torres's face. "Tell me exactly how it happened, and maybe I decide there's a version of this where you walk out of this room breathing." Torres's hands trembled violently. "Bellini's people came to me 2 months ago. They knew things about my sister, about her gambling debts, about the men she owed money to. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd make sure those men collected in ways that would destroy her life. I didn't have a choice, Adrian. I swear to you, I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Adrian said quietly. "You could have come to me. You could have told me your sister was in danger, and I would have handled it. Instead, you chose to protect her by endangering an innocent child." "I didn't know there was a child involved," Torres said desperately. "I swear all I did was confirm that a woman named Elena Moretti used to work at this clinic and that she left suddenly 2 years ago. I didn't know why they wanted that information. I swear to God I didn't know." Adrian studied him for a long moment, weighing the desperation in Torres's voice against the magnitude of what his information had set into motion. "Who is your contact inside Bellini's organization?" "A man named Rossi, Danny Rossi. He handles Bellini's information gathering." Adrian's mind was already working, already calculating, already 3 steps ahead in a chess game that had suddenly become far more personal than any conflict he had faced in years. "You're going to help me," he said finally. "You're going to reach out to Rossi, and you're going to tell him you have more information. And in exchange, your sister's debts disappear, and you leave this city tonight and never come back. Do you understand me?" Torres's eyes widened with disbelief. "You're letting me go?" "I'm giving you a way to fix a mistake you never should have made," Adrian said coldly. "Betray me again, and there won't be a second conversation. Do you understand?" "Yes. Yes, I understand completely." Adrian left the room 10 minutes later with a plan forming rapidly in his mind. A plan that would require exactly the kind of ruthless precision that had built his empire in the first place. But as he walked back toward the reinforced lower level where Elena and Sophia waited, his phone buzzed with a message that stopped him cold in the middle of the hallway. Unknown number. A single photograph attached. Elena walking Sophia into her daycare 3 days earlier, completely unaware she was being watched. Beneath the photograph, a single line of text. "You should have told him sooner, Elena. Now it's too late to protect either of you." Adrian's blood turned to ice. The message hadn't come from Bellini's usual channels. It had come directly to Adrian's private number, a number almost nobody had access to, which meant one of two things. Either the leak inside his organization ran deeper than Ricky Torres, or someone even closer to him had been compromised. He forwarded the message immediately to Dominic, his hand steady despite the fury building beneath the surface, and made his way back toward the room where his family waited, already calculating who among his most trusted circle could possibly have access to a number that secure. When he entered the room, Elena took one look at his face and knew immediately something else had gone wrong. "What happened?" she asked, rising instantly. Adrian showed her this message without a word, watching her face drain of color as she read it. "He's been watching me for 3 days," she whispered. "How did he even know where to look?" "That's what I intend to find out," Adrian said grimly. "And whoever gave him access to my private number is going to answer for it personally." Dominic, who had been reviewing security footage on a nearby monitor, suddenly went very still. "Adrian," he said slowly, "I think you need to see this." He turned the monitor toward them, footage from 3 weeks earlier, time-stamped from a security camera near the private entrance of the compound. A car pulled up. A woman stepped out, elegant, composed, unmistakable even in grainy footage. Elena felt Adrian's entire body go rigid beside her. "Who is that?" she asked, though something in Adrian's expression told her the answer before he spoke. "Vanessa," Adrian said, his voice tight with disbelief. "My former fiancée. The Vanessa you mentioned the morning after the gala," Elena said slowly, pieces beginning to click into place in her mind, pieces that suddenly painted an entirely different picture of the 2 years she had spent believing herself alone in her secret. "She came to the compound 3 weeks ago," Dominic confirmed, pulling up additional footage. "She met privately with one of the senior accountants for almost an hour. I flagged it at the time as unusual, but Vanessa still has connections to several people in this organization from her time with Adrian. I didn't think much of it." 3 weeks ago, Elena repeated slowly. "That's almost exactly when the man started watching me outside the daycare." The realization settled over the room like a physical weight, and Adrian's expression transformed into something Elena had never witnessed before, a cold, controlled fury that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a flame. "She knows about Sophia," he said quietly. "Vanessa found out about my daughter before I did." "How is that possible?" Elena asked. "Because Vanessa has spent 5 years trying to find a way back into my life," Adrian said, his voice hollow with the weight of a betrayal that reached back further than either of them had imagined. "When I ended our engagement, she swore I would regret it. I assumed that was heartbreak talking. I never imagined she would align herself with Marco Bellini to make good on that promise." Elena's mind raced, connecting threads that suddenly formed an entirely different, far more dangerous picture. "You think she's the one who told Bellini about me? Not just some random surveillance, not some accidental discovery. You think she's been planning this?" "I think," Adrian said slowly, each word deliberate and cold, "that Vanessa has spent months searching for exactly this kind of opportunity, and the moment she found it, she handed it directly to the one man in this city, with enough resources and enough hatred toward me to use it properly." Dominic pulled up one final piece of footage, his expression grim. "There's more. This was taken 2 days ago outside a restaurant downtown." The footage showed Vanessa seated across from a man Elena didn't recognize, but whose posture radiated the same dangerous authority she had come to associate with powerful men in Adrian's world. "That's Marco Bellini." Adrian confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper, the full magnitude of the betrayal finally crystallizing completely. "My former fiancé is working directly with the man trying to destroy my family." Elena sank slowly into the nearest chair, Sophia stirring against her chest, and for a moment the sheer scale of the danger they were facing threatened to overwhelm her completely. "What does she want?" Elena asked quietly. "If this is about revenge against you, why involve Sophia at all? Why not just come after you directly?" Adrian's jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight of understanding that chilled Elena to her core. "Because Vanessa knows exactly what would hurt me the most," he said. "She spent 3 years with me. She knows I never let anyone close enough to matter, that I built my entire life around never having anything anyone could take from me. And now, for the first time, I have something that matters more than my empire, more than my own life." His eyes found Sophia, then Elena, and something fierce and protective burned behind them. "She doesn't want my empire. She wants to watch me lose the only thing I've ever truly cared about." The words hung in the room like a verdict, and outside the reinforced walls of the compound, somewhere across the city, Marco Bellini and Vanessa were already finalizing a plan that would test every promise Adrian Valenti had just made. A plan that would force him to choose in the most devastating way possible between the empire that had defined his entire life and the small, fragile family he had only just discovered was his to protect. Elena looked down at her daughter's peaceful sleeping face, then up at Adrian, standing rigid with barely controlled fury, and felt the full weight of what they were facing settle over her completely. "Adrian," she said quietly, "what happens now?" Adrian turned to face her, and the answer in his eyes was unmistakable, resolute and terrifying in its certainty. "Now," he said, "I make sure Marco Bellini and Vanessa understand exactly what it costs to threaten what belongs to me." Dominic moved fast, pulling every available man into the Situation Room within minutes, screens lighting up with maps, photographs, financial records stretching back months. Adrian stood at the center of it all. Sophia's small handprint still warm against his palm, from where he'd held her fingers an hour earlier, and something in him had shifted permanently. He was no longer simply defending his territory. He was defending his daughter. "I want everything on Vanessa's movements for the last 6 months." Adrian set his voice flat and controlled in a way that unsettled even the men who had worked beside him for years. "Every meeting, every phone call, every dollar that's moved through accounts connected to her name." "Adrian." Dominic hesitated, glancing toward Elena, who stood near the doorway with Sophia asleep against her shoulder. "Some of what we find you might not want to hear in front of—" "She stays," Adrian said firmly. "Elena has more right to this information than anyone in this room. This isn't happening to me anymore. It's happening to all 3 of us." Elena felt something tighten in her chest at those words, a fragile warmth she hadn't expected to feel in the middle of so much fear. She stepped further into the room, adjusting Sophia gently against her shoulder. "Show me," she said quietly. "I want to understand exactly what we're facing." Dominic pulled up a financial ledger. On the main screen, rows of transactions highlighted in red. "Vanessa's been receiving payments through 3 shell accounts over the past 4 months. Small at first, but they've grown substantially in the last 3 weeks, right around the time surveillance began on you and Sophia." "Coming from where?" Adrian asked. "Untraceable on the surface," Dominic admitted. "But the pattern matches Bellini's usual laundering structure almost exactly. I'd stake my life on it being his money." Adrian's jaw tightened. "So she's not just feeding him information, she's being paid for it." "It looks that way." Elena watched Adrian process this, watched the muscles in his shoulders coil tighter with every passing second, and found herself speaking before she could stop the words. "Why would she do this? You said she wanted you to regret leaving her. But this isn't heartbreak, Adrian. This is something colder." Adrian's eyes darkened. "Vanessa never loved me," he said quietly. "She loved what my name could give her. When I ended things, she lost access to everything she'd spent 3 years building toward. Bellini didn't have to convince her to hate me. He just had to offer her a way to profit from that hatred." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of monitors and Sophia's soft breathing against her mother's shoulder. "There's something else," Dominic said carefully, pulling up another file. "Rossi, the contact Ricky Torres mentioned, he's not just Bellini's information handler. He's also the man who arranges Bellini's off-book security, which means if Bellini is planning something more direct against Elena or Sophia, Rossi would know the details first." "Then we start with Rossi," Adrian said. There's a problem with that, Dominic replied. Rossi doesn't meet with strangers. He's careful, paranoid, almost impossible to approach without an existing relationship. The only person with direct access to him right now is Torres. Adrian's expression sharpened with calculation. Torres already agreed to help. Bring him back in. 20 minutes later, Ricky Torres sat across from Adrian again, visibly shaking. Though this time, the fear in his eyes carried a different quality, something closer to desperate hope that cooperation might actually save him. You said you'd help your sister if you helped me, Torres said quietly. I'm ready to do whatever you need. I need you to set up a meeting with Rossi, Adrian said. Tell him you have information about Elena's location information you're willing to sell for the right price. Make him believe you're still loyal to Bellini's side, that you're playing both games for personal profit. Torres swallowed hard. And if he asks for specifics I don't have. You'll have specifics, Adrian said, because I'm going to feed you false information designed to draw Bellini's men into a location I control. If Rossi takes the bait, we find out exactly how deep this operation runs, and we do it on our terms, instead of waiting for Bellini to make the next move. Elena, standing near the back of the room, felt her stomach twist. Adrian, this sounds incredibly dangerous. It is, Adrian admitted, turning to face her. But right now, Bellini controls the timeline. He knows about Sofia. He's already tested our defenses once tonight. If we don't take back control of this situation, he decides when and how he comes after her next, and I refuse to let that happen. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to find some safer alternative, but she understood the truth in his words, even as fear gripped her chest. Waiting was no longer an option. Do it, she said quietly. But Adrian, I want to know every step of this plan. I am not going to sit somewhere safe while you decide my daughter's fate without me. Our daughter, Adrian corrected softly, and something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement neither of them had spoken aloud until now. Elena's breath caught. Our daughter, she repeated, testing the words, feeling their weight settle somewhere deep and unfamiliar inside her chest. The meeting between Torres and Rossi was arranged for the following evening at a restaurant downtown, a location Adrian's men had already secured with hidden surveillance and armed personnel disguised as ordinary staff. Elena spent the day pacing the compound's living quarters, Sofia playing quietly on the floor nearby, unaware that her entire future was being negotiated in rooms filled with maps and weapons. You should eat something, Adrian said, appearing in the doorway with a plate of food she hadn't asked for. I can't, Elena admitted. Every time I try, my stomach just turns. Adrian set the plate down and sat across from her, watching Sofia stack colorful blocks with fierce concentration. She's remarkable, he said quietly. 2 years old and already so focused, so determined. She gets that from you. She gets the stubbornness from both of us, I think. Elena said, a small, exhausted smile breaking through her worry for the first time in hours. Adrian's expression softened. I missed so much, he said quietly. Her first steps. Her first word. 2 years of birthdays and milestones I didn't even know existed. I know, Elena said, guilt threading through her voice. I think about that every single day, Adrian. I convinced myself I was protecting her, but some days I wonder if I was really just protecting myself from getting hurt again. You don't have to explain yourself, Adrian said. I understand why you left. I heard one conversation that must have sounded exactly like every fear you've ever had about men like me. That's not an excuse for staying silent for 2 years, Elena said. No? Adrian agreed. But it's an explanation, and there's a difference. I'm not interested in punishing you for a decision you made out of fear. I'm interested in making sure neither of us ever makes decisions rooted in fear again. The moment stretched between them, fragile and honest, until Dominic's voice crackled through the radio on Adrian's belt. Adrian Torres just confirmed the meeting. 20 minutes downtown location. Rossi's coming alone, which either means he's confident or he's more careful than we expected and has backup positioned somewhere we haven't identified yet." Adrian stood immediately, the softness in his expression hardening back into focused resolve. "I need to be there," he said. "Adrian, wait." Elena rose as well, panic flashing across her face. "If you're recognized, if anything goes wrong, I won't be seen," Adrian said. "I'll be watching from a secure position, nothing more. But I need to know exactly what Rossi says, exactly how deep this goes. And I trust my own judgment more than anyone else's when it comes to reading a man like that." Elena wanted to protest further, but the resolve in his eyes told her this argument was already decided. "Please be careful," she said instead, her voice breaking slightly. Adrian paused at the door, turning back to look at her, at Sophia still stacking her blocks obliviously on the floor. "I have something worth being careful for now," he said quietly. "I intend to come back to both of you." The restaurant downtown buzzed with ordinary evening chatter, oblivious to the dangerous exchange unfolding at a corner table where Ricky Torres sat across from a lean, sharp-eyed man in an expensive gray suit. Adrian watched from a surveillance van 2 blocks away, feeds from 3 hidden cameras displaying different angles of the conversation. "You said you had information," Rossi said, his voice smooth, cautious. "I don't have time for games, Torres. Mr. Bellini doesn't pay for wasted evenings." "I have an address," Torres said exactly as Adrian had instructed. "The woman's staying somewhere different now, not the apartment your surveillance already knows about. Somewhere more secure." Rossi's eyes narrowed slightly. "How did you get this information?" "I still have contacts inside Valenti's operation," Torres said, sweat beading despite the careful control in his voice. "People who owe me favors. It wasn't easy." Rossi studied him for a long moment, and Adrian, watching from the van, felt his pulse quicken with tension. If Rossi didn't believe the performance, if he sensed even a hint of deception, the entire operation would collapse instantly. And worse, Bellini would know Adrian was actively working against him. "Give me the address," Rossi said finally. Torres recited the fabricated location, a warehouse Adrian's men had prepared specifically for this purpose, rigged with surveillance, and positioned men ready to identify anyone who approached. Rossi nodded slowly, sliding an envelope of cash across the table. "Mr. Bellini will be pleased with this information." "What exactly does he plan to do with it?" Torres asked, pushing his luck slightly exactly as Adrian had coached him. Rossi's expression turned cold. "That's not your concern. Your concern is making sure this information is accurate. If it's not, you'll wish you'd never contacted me." "It's accurate," Torres said quickly. Rossi rose from the table, straightening his jacket. "Mr. Bellini intends to resolve this situation permanently within the next 48 hours. The girl becomes leverage. If Valenti wants to see his daughter again, he learns exactly what it costs to have something Marco Bellini decides he wants." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow through the surveillance feed. 48 hours. Bellini intended to kidnap Sophia within 48 hours. Adrian was already moving before Rossi had finished walking away from the table, radioing every available team. His voice sharp with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. "Pull Torres out now. We have 48 hours before Bellini attempts to take Sophia directly. I want maximum security on the compound immediately, and I want a full strategic response ready within the hour." Back at the compound, Elena felt the shift in energy the moment Adrian returned, his expression tighter, more controlled, more dangerous than she had seen it even during the chaos of the previous night. "What happened?" she asked immediately. Sophia now asleep in a portable crib nearby. "Bellini's planning to move within 48 hours. Adrian said, his voice steady, despite the fury simmering beneath it. "He intends to take Sophia, directly use her as leverage against me." Elena's hand flew to her mouth, horror flooding her expression. "Adrian, he can't. We have to do something. We have to stop this before—" "We will," Adrian said firmly, closing the distance between them, his hands finding her shoulders, steadying her with a calm he didn't entirely feel himself. "I promise you, Elena, nothing happens to her. Nothing. But we need to change our strategy completely. Waiting for him to move isn't an option anymore. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked, forcing herself to breathe evenly, despite the terror clawing at her chest. Adrian's eyes hardened with resolve. "I'm thinking it's time the entire council knows exactly what's happening. Bellini has broken every rule our world operates by. Targeting children isn't just dishonorable. It's forbidden by every family with any claim to legitimacy. If I bring this in front of the council, if I expose what he's planning, I strip away any protection his own alliances might offer him." "Will they believe you?" Elena asked. "They'll believe evidence," Adrian said. "And thanks to tonight, we have plenty." The council meeting was called for the following morning, an assembly of the city's most powerful family leaders, convening in a location so secretive that even Elena wasn't told its address. Only that Dominic would remain with her and Sophia throughout, surrounded by the tightest security detail Adrian could assemble. "I don't like this," Elena admitted as Adrian prepared to leave. "You're walking into a room full of dangerous men to expose another dangerous man. What if this backfires?" "It won't," Adrian said, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed his own uncertainty. "The council operates on rules, even in a world that seems lawless from the outside. Targeting a child violates every one of those rules. Bellini knows this, which is exactly why he's moved as quickly and secretly as he has. Exposing his plan publicly removes his advantage completely. And if the council doesn't care, if they decide protecting their own power matters more than protecting Sophia." Adrian's expression turned fierce protective in a way that stole Elena's breath completely. "Then I burn every alliance I have to protect her myself," he said. "I am not losing my daughter to a man who thinks children are acceptable collateral in a war for power." The council chamber was an imposing room, deep within a private club, owned collectively by the city's oldest families, dark wood paneling portraits of long-dead patriarchs lining the walls. 12 powerful men seated around an ancient table that had witnessed decades of decisions shaping the underworld of New York. Adrian entered with Dominic at his side, presenting evidence, methodically financial records, connecting Vanessa to Bellini's payment surveillance footage of Rossi confirming Bellini's plan to kidnap a 2-year-old child, transcripts of the threatening message sent directly to Adrian's private phone. The room remained silent throughout the presentation, 12 faces, unreadable, until finally an elderly man at the head of the table, Salvatore Greco, the most respected patriarch among them, spoke. "You're certain of this evidence, Adrian?" "Completely certain," Adrian said. "Marco Bellini intends to kidnap my daughter within the next 36 hours. He has already conducted surveillance on her mother for weeks. He has already attempted to breach my compound once." Murmurs rippled around the table, several faces shifting from unreadable neutrality to open disapproval. "This is a serious accusation," another council member said, a heavy-set man named Falcone, who had never particularly liked Adrian. "Bellini built significant alliances within this council. Are you certain this isn't simply a personal vendetta dressed up as evidence?" Before Adrian could respond, Salvatore raised a hand, silencing the room instantly. "I have known Adrian Valenti since he was a boy, standing beside his father's coffin, forced into a role he never asked for," Salvatore said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of authority. "In 15 years, he has never once brought a personal grievance before this council. If he says Marco Bellini has targeted a child, I believe him completely." Falcone's expression darkened, but he remained silent. Salvatore turned back to Adrian. "This council has one rule that supersedes every other agreement between our families. Children remain untouched, regardless of conflict, regardless of history, regardless of personal vendetta. If what you're presenting is accurate, Bellini has violated the single most sacred principle holding this fragile piece together." "It's accurate," Adrian said firmly. "And I intend to make sure the entire council understands exactly what kind of man Marco Bellini has become." "What is it you're asking of us?" Salvatore asked. Adrian's eyes moved across every face at the table, and when he spoke, his voice carried a conviction Dominic had never heard from him before, not in 15 years of loyal service. "This child is not my weakness," Adrian said, his voice steady, unshakable. This is the reason I finally understand what I am fighting for. I am asking this council to formally withdraw protection from Marco Bellini's operations. I am asking every family at this table to understand that if he is willing to target my daughter, he will eventually be willing to target yours." The room went completely silent. Falcone shifted uncomfortably, several other council members exchanging uneasy glances, the weight of Adrian's words settling over the room like a physical presence. This was not simply a conflict between two rival families anymore. This was a fundamental violation of the code that allowed their entire world to function without complete chaos. Salvatore studied Adrian for a long moment before finally speaking. "The council will vote on formal withdrawal of protection," he said. "But Adrian understands something. If we grant this, Bellini becomes an open target, unprotected by any alliance. Whatever happens to him after this vote happens, without consequence from any family represented at this table. Is that truly what you're asking for?" Adrian didn't hesitate. Yes, the vote passed unanimously, even Falcone eventually raising his hand in agreement, unwilling to be the single dissenting voice on an issue involving a child. Adrian left the council chamber with something he hadn't expected to feel walking in, not victory exactly, but a fierce protective clarity that had eluded him for most of his adult life. For the first time, he wasn't simply defending territory or reputation. He was defending something that mattered infinitely more. But victory in the council chamber meant nothing if Bellini moved before word of the ruling reached him. And as Adrian's car sped back toward the compound, his phone buzzed with a message from Dominic that sent ice through his veins. "Adrian, we have a problem. Bellini's men are already moving. They're not waiting 48 hours. Adrian's driver pushed the car faster, weaving through traffic with reckless urgency, while Adrian dialed Dominic directly, his heart pounding with a fear more powerful than anything he had experienced in his entire violent, dangerous career. "Talk to me," Adrian said the moment Dominic answered. "Two vehicles just breached the outer perimeter," Dominic said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "We're containing it, but Adrian, they came in faster and harder than we expected. Whoever's running this operation knew exactly where our weakest points were." "Where's Elena? Where's Sophia?" "Safe room secured," Dominic confirmed. "But Adrian, I need you here immediately. This isn't a probe like last time. This is a real attempt." Adrian's car screeched to a halt outside the compound. 11 minutes later, gunfire echoing from somewhere near the northern wall. Security personnel moving in coordinated defensive formations across the grounds. Adrian moved through the chaos with singular purpose, ignoring the danger entirely driven by a need to reach his family that overpowered every instinct for self-preservation. He found the safe room exactly where he'd left it, sealed secure. Dominic standing guard outside, with 2 additional armed men. "They're inside, both of them, completely safe," Dominic confirmed as Adrian approached. "The breach is being contained. We've already neutralized 4 of Bellini's men, and the rest are retreating." Adrian exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, but the relief was short-lived when the steel door opened and Elena emerged. Sophia clutched tightly against her chest, her face pale with terror, but her eyes blazing with a fierce protective fury. Adrian recognized instantly, because he had seen the exact same expression in his own reflection countless times. "This has to end," Elena said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Adrian, I can't keep living like this. I can't keep watching my daughter grow up surrounded by gunfire and men trying to kidnap her. Something has to change." "I know," Adrian said, closing the distance between them, his hands finding her face gently, despite the chaos still echoing somewhere beyond the walls. "I know, and I promise you this ends soon. The council has withdrawn protection from Bellini. He's exposed now, vulnerable in ways he's never been before." "That's not enough," Elena said. "He's still out there. He still knows about her. Withdrawing protection doesn't erase the danger, Adrian. It just means he has less to lose when he comes after us again." The truth in her words struck Adrian harder than he wanted to admit. Council protection withdrawn meant Bellini could be targeted without consequence. But it also meant Bellini facing complete exposure and loss of standing among his peers might become even more desperate even more dangerous in his final attempts to secure leverage before his entire operation collapsed. "You're right," Adrian admitted quietly. "This isn't over yet. But Elena, I need you to trust me. I need you to trust that everything I'm doing right now is aimed at one single goal, keeping the two of you safe permanently, not just for tonight, but forever." Elena's eyes filled with tears. Exhaustion and fear finally breaking through the composed strength she had maintained for hours. "I do trust you," she whispered. "That's the terrifying part, Adrian. Despite everything, despite 2 years of secrets and one violent night after another, I trust you completely. And I don't know what to do with that." Adrian pulled her gently into his arms. Sophia sandwiched carefully between them, and for a brief moment amid the chaos of gunfire fading into silence and security, teams securing the perimeter, the three of them existed in a fragile bubble of connection that felt, despite everything, like the beginning of something real. "There's something else you need to know," Dominic said quietly, breaking the moment with obvious reluctance. During the breach, one of Bellini's men was captured alive. He's talking Adrian, and what he's saying, you need to hear it directly. Adrian reluctantly released Elena, his protective instincts flaring instantly. "Bring him to the interrogation room." "There's a complication," Dominic said carefully. "He's not asking to speak with you. He's asking to speak with Elena directly. He says he has information only she would understand the significance of." Elena's blood ran cold. "Me? Why would he want to speak with me?" Dominic's expression darkened further. "He claims Vanessa isn't simply working with Bellini for money or revenge. He claims there's something else driving her involvement, something personal, something connected directly to you, Elena, from before you ever met Adrian." The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Memories she had buried for years, suddenly clawing their way back to the surface, a connection she had never imagined could exist between her carefully hidden past and the dangerous woman who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. "That's not possible," Elena whispered, though her voice betrayed a flicker of uncertain fear. "I've never even met Vanessa. I didn't know she existed until yesterday." "Are you certain?" Dominic asked carefully. "Because according to the man we captured, Vanessa has known exactly who you are for a very long time, long before you ever walked into Adrian's clinic 3 years ago." Adrian's eyes moved sharply between Dominic and Elena, confusion and dawning suspicion mixing across his features. "What is he talking about? Elena? Is there something you haven't told me?" Elena's mind raced backward through years of memory, searching for any connection, any explanation for how a woman she had never met could possibly know her identity before their paths ever crossed. And then suddenly, a memory surfaced, distant and fragmented. A name mentioned briefly years ago during nursing school, a woman who had dated one of her classmates, a woman whose photograph she had seen exactly once at a party she barely remembered attending. "Oh my God," Elena whispered, color draining from her face completely. "I think I do know her. Not well, not directly, but Adrian, years ago, before I ever started working at your clinic, I dated someone. Briefly, casually, nothing serious. His name was Marcus, and I remember at a party once seeing a photograph of his previous girlfriend. Adrian, I think that woman was Vanessa." The room fell into stunned silence, the pieces of an elaborate years-long puzzle suddenly rearranging themselves into a picture far more calculated and personal than anyone had imagined. "You're saying Vanessa knew about you before you ever met me?" Adrian said slowly, disbelief and dawning horror mixing across his face. "You're saying this wasn't random. You're saying she's been positioning herself for revenge against both of us for years long before either of us understood we were connected at all." Elena's hands trembled as she held Sophia tighter against her chest, the full magnitude of the conspiracy finally becoming horrifyingly clear. "I think," Elena said slowly, forcing herself through the fear paralyzing her thoughts, "that Vanessa didn't just find out about Sophia recently. I think she's been watching me, watching us for years, waiting for exactly the right moment to destroy everything both of us ever tried to build." Adrian's expression hardened into something colder and more determined than Elena had ever witnessed, a resolve forged from the terrifying realization that the danger facing his family ran far deeper and far more calculated than a simple rivalry between crime families. "Bring the prisoner to me directly," Adrian said, his voice carrying an authority that left absolutely no room for argument. "I want every single detail he knows, and I want it now, because if Vanessa has been planning this for years, we are not simply facing a threat from Marco Bellini anymore. We are facing something far more dangerous, something personal, something that has been waiting patiently in the shadows for exactly this moment to strike." Outside the walls of the compound, in a location none of them could yet identify, Vanessa sat across from Marco Bellini, a satisfied smile curving across her lips as she watched security footage of the chaos she had orchestrated unfold across a bank of monitors. "They still don't understand," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They still think this is simply about the child." Marco Bellini glanced at her, something calculating and slightly unsettled crossing his features. "You've waited a long time for this," he said. "3 years," Vanessa replied, her eyes never leaving the screen where Adrian could be seen, holding Elena close, the fragile family he had only just discovered, flickering across the monitor like a wound she intended to reopen completely. 3 years of watching him choose his empire over me. 3 years of watching him build walls I could never break through. And then one clinic assistant walks into his life, and suddenly, he's capable of everything he never gave me. "So this was never really about the money," Marco said slowly. Vanessa's smile turned razor-sharp cold and utterly without remorse. "The money was simply a convenient arrangement," she said. "What I actually want, Marco, is far more personal than anything your organization could ever offer me. I want Adrian Valenti to understand exactly what it feels like to lose everything he loves, the way he made me feel the day he chose his empire over our future." Marco studied her carefully, a flicker of genuine unease crossing his usually confident expression. "And the child? What happens to her in this plan of yours?" Vanessa's eyes finally left the monitor, settling on Marco with an intensity that made even a man like him shift uncomfortably in his seat. "The child," she said quietly, "is simply the instrument. What happens to her depends entirely on how quickly Adrian understands that some debts can never truly be repaid, only paid forward generation after generation until the scales finally balance completely." The chilling ambiguity of her words hung in the room unanswered as somewhere across the city, inside a compound now bristling with heightened security, Adrian Valenti prepared to extract every remaining secret from a captured enemy. Unaware that the true architect of his family's destruction had been patiently orchestrating this moment for far longer than he could have ever imagined, and that the coming confrontation would force him to make a choice more devastating than any he had faced in 15 years of ruling New York's most dangerous empire. The prisoner sat bound to a chair when Adrian entered the interrogation room. A young man barely older than 25, his face bruised from the earlier confrontation, his eyes darting nervously toward the door as if hoping for a rescue that would never come. "You wanted to speak with Elena," Adrian said, his voice deceptively calm. "She's not here. You're speaking with me." "I don't know anything else," the man stammered. "I already told your men everything. You told them enough to terrify her," Adrian said, leaning down until his face was level with the prisoner's. "Now you're going to tell me everything else, every detail about Vanessa, every detail about her connection to Elena, and you're going to do it without me having to ask twice." The man's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Vanessa doesn't share information with soldiers like me. I just heard things. Fragments. Bellini and her talking when they thought nobody else could hear." "What fragments?" "She said something about a debt," the man said quickly, desperate to satisfy the demand before Adrian's patience ran out. "She said Elena's ex-boyfriend owed her something, and Elena was the price for settling it. I don't understand what that means. I swear that's just what I heard." Adrian straightened slowly, his mind working through the fragment methodically. "A debt," he repeated. "What kind of debt?" "I don't know," the man said, his voice cracking with genuine fear now. "Please, I've told you everything I know." Adrian studied him for a long moment, searching for any hint of deception, finding none beyond the terror of a low-level soldier caught in a war far larger than his understanding. He turned without another word and walked out, leaving the prisoner in the custody of 2 guards, his mind already racing toward Elena, toward the fragmented piece of information that had just reshaped everything he thought he understood about the danger facing his family. He found Elena in the private quarters, Sophia finally asleep in a portable crib beside the bed. Exhaustion etched into every line of Elena's face as she sat curled in a chair, staring at nothing. "He mentioned a debt," Adrian said quietly, sitting across from her. "Something about your ex-boyfriend owing something to Vanessa, and you being the price for settling it. Elena, does that mean anything to you?" Elena's face went pale, memories she had buried for years, suddenly clawing their way back into painful clarity. "Marcus?" she whispered. "Oh God, Marcus." "Tell me," Adrian said gently. Elena took a shaking breath, forcing herself through memories she had spent years trying to forget. "Marcus and I dated for almost a year during nursing school. He was charming at first, but things got complicated. He had debts, gambling debts, more than I ever realized until it was too late. Near the end of our relationship, he started asking me to do things I wasn't comfortable with, favors for people he owed money to. I found out later some of those people were connected to organized crime." "Bellini's organization?" Adrian asked. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I never knew exactly who they were. I just knew Marcus was in over his head, and I refused to get pulled into whatever mess he'd created. I ended things and never looked back." "And Vanessa?" Adrian pressed. "Did you ever meet her directly?" Elena shook her head slowly. "Never directly. But I remember near the end of our relationship, Marcus mentioned a woman he owed money to, someone dangerous, someone he was terrified of. He never told me her name, but I remember him saying she collected debts in ways that weren't always about money." The pieces clicked together in Adrian's mind with horrifying clarity. "She's been planning this for years," he said slowly. "Not since I ended things with her. Long before that. If Marcus owed Vanessa something and used you as an attempted payment, that means she's known about you since before you and I ever met." "That's impossible," Elena said, though her voice carried more uncertainty than conviction. "How could she have known I would end up at your clinic? How could she have possibly orchestrated something that specific years in advance?" "Maybe she didn't orchestrate it," Adrian said slowly, a horrifying realization dawning across his face. "Maybe she recognized an opportunity when it presented itself. Elena, think carefully. When you got the job at my clinic, who recruited you?" Elena's breath caught. "Dominic," she whispered. "Dominic recruited me directly." The silence that followed was deafening. "You think Dominic is involved in this?" Elena said slowly, disbelief coloring her voice. "I don't want to believe it," Adrian admitted, standing abruptly, pacing the length of the room with barely contained tension. "Dominic has served my family for 15 years. He's the closest thing to a brother I've ever had. But Elena, someone with intimate knowledge of my organization, recruited you specifically. Someone gave Vanessa access to information about Sophia. Someone helped Bellini's men breach security protocols that should have been impossible to circumvent." "You can't be certain it's him," Elena said, though doubt was creeping into her own voice now. "No," Adrian agreed. "But I intend to find out with absolute certainty, because if Dominic has betrayed this family, if he's been working against us this entire time while pretending loyalty, then everything we've built our defense strategy around has been compromised from the very beginning." Adrian left the room immediately, finding Dominic in the security office, reviewing footage from the earlier breach, his expression tense with focus. "I need to ask you something," Adrian said, his voice carefully neutral despite the storm building beneath the surface. "And I need complete honesty regardless of what the answer might mean." Dominic looked up, something flickering across his face that Adrian couldn't quite identify. "Of course. What is it? How did you find Elena 3 years ago? What made you recruit her specifically for the clinic position?" Dominic's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a hesitation so brief Adrian might have missed it if he hadn't spent 15 years learning to read every subtle change in the people around him. "Standard recruitment," Dominic said. "We needed medical staff. She had excellent credentials, discretion, exactly what the position required. That's not what I asked. Adrian said, his voice hardening. I asked how you specifically found her. Out of every qualified medical professional in this city, how did her name reach your desk? Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A referral, he admitted finally, reluctantly. From whom? The silence stretched between them, heavy and dangerous, until Dominic finally spoke, his voice quieter than Adrian had ever heard it. Vanessa, he said. Vanessa gave me Elena's name. Adrian felt the floor shift beneath him, betrayal and confusion colliding violently in his chest. You've known this entire time, he said slowly, disbelief mixing with fury. You've known Vanessa was connected to Elena's recruitment, and you never once mentioned it. Adrian, it wasn't like that, Dominic said quickly, standing, his hands raised in a placating gesture. This was almost 3 years ago, right after your engagement ended. Vanessa reached out to me, said she wanted to help you rebuild your life. Said she knew a qualified medical assistant looking for discreet work. I had no reason to suspect it was anything more than what it appeared to be. I swear to you, Adrian, I had no idea this was part of some larger plan. You should have told me, Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous. The moment Elena disappeared, the moment I discovered Sophia, you should have immediately mentioned that the woman I was investigating had personally recruited Elena into my organization. That's not an oversight, Dominic. That's a betrayal of the most basic trust between us. I know, Dominic said, guilt evident in every line of his face. I know, and I'm sorry, but Adrian, I promise you I have never once worked against this family. I made an error in judgment 3 years ago, trusting Vanessa's motives without questioning them thoroughly enough. But everything since then, every action I've taken, has been in service of protecting you and now protecting Elena and Sophia. Adrian studied him for a long, tense moment, weighing 15 years of loyalty against the magnitude of this revelation. I want to believe you, he said finally. But Dominic, effective immediately, every decision regarding Elena and Sophia's security goes through me directly. No exceptions, no independent judgment calls. Do you understand? I understand completely, Dominic said, his voice heavy with the weight of trust damaged perhaps irreparably. Adrian turned to leave, his mind already racing toward the next crucial question. The question that mattered more than anything else in this unfolding nightmare. One more thing, Adrian said, pausing at the door. If Vanessa specifically targeted Elena for recruitment 3 years ago, that means this entire situation, everything from the night of the gala forward, might not have been coincidence at all. Dominic's face paled with the implication. You think Vanessa orchestrated your relationship with Elena from the very beginning? I think, Adrian said slowly, the horrifying realization crystallizing completely in his mind, that Vanessa placed Elena in my life specifically hoping something would develop between us. Understanding that if it did, she would eventually have exactly the kind of leverage she's using right now. I think we've been pieces in her plan since before either of us ever understood we were playing her game at all. The revelation sent Adrian storming back toward the private quarters, urgency propelling him forward, with a need to understand the full scope of a conspiracy that had apparently been unfolding for years, hidden beneath layers of manipulation, so careful neither he nor Elena had ever suspected its existence. Elena looked up as he entered, reading the storm in his expression instantly. What did you find out? Vanessa placed you in my life deliberately. Adrian said, the words tasting bitter even as he spoke them. Dominic confirmed she personally recommended your recruitment 3 years ago. Elena, this wasn't coincidence. None of it was ever coincidence. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, horror dawning across her face, as 3 years of memories reorganized themselves into a far darker, more calculated picture. She wanted this to happen, Elena whispered. She wanted us to fall for each other. Wanted a child to exist specifically so she could use it against you eventually. It appears that way, Adrian confirmed grimly. That's insane, Elena said, standing abruptly, pacing with barely restrained panic. Who planned something this elaborate, this patient? 3 years, Adrian. She waited 3 years for this exact moment. Vanessa isn't like other people, Adrian said quietly. When we were engaged, I saw glimpses of this capacity in her, but I convinced myself I was imagining things that her ambition and calculation were simply the product of growing up in a world that demanded both. I never imagined she would turn that capacity into something this monstrous. Before Elena could respond, Adrian's phone buzzed with an urgent notification. He glanced at the screen, and his expression transformed instantly into something cold and alert. "What is it?" Elena asked immediately, fear returning to her voice. "Movement outside the northern perimeter," Adrian said, already moving toward the door. Dominic's team spotted a vehicle matching Bellini's known fleet, but Elena, this is different. It's not approaching aggressively like before. It's just sitting there watching. Watching for what? Adrian's expression darkened further as another notification appeared on his screen. "There's a message," he said, slowly reading it with growing horror. "It's from Vanessa directly." Elena's blood ran cold. "What does it say?" Adrian read aloud, his voice tight, with controlled fury. "I know you've discovered my involvement now, Adrian. I know Dominic finally told you the truth. But understanding my plan doesn't mean you can stop it. I've been 3 steps ahead of you since the beginning, and I intend to stay there. Meet me alone within the hour, or Marco makes his move on your daughter tonight instead of waiting for the deadline we discussed." The room went completely silent, the weight of the ultimatum settling over both of them like a physical presence. "You can't go alone," Elena said immediately, panic flooding her voice. "Adrian, this is exactly what she wants. She's trying to separate you from your protection, trying to isolate you." "I know," Adrian said grimly. "But Elena, if I refuse, if I don't show up, Bellini moves tonight instead of waiting. We don't have the luxury of choosing the safer option here. Every path forward carries risk." "Then let me come with you," Elena said desperately. "Absolutely not," Adrian said firmly. "Whatever happens in this meeting, you need to stay here with Sophia, protected, secure. If something goes wrong, if this is a trap designed to eliminate me entirely, someone needs to make sure Sophia has protection, has resources, has everything she needs to survive without me." "Don't talk like that," Elena said, tears filling her eyes. "Don't talk like you're already accepting that you might not come back." Adrian crossed the room, taking her face gently in his hands, his eyes filled with an intensity that stole her breath completely. "I intend to come back," he said firmly. "I intend to walk out of whatever meeting Vanessa has planned and return to both of you exactly as I am right now. But Elena, I need you to understand something important. 15 years ago, I inherited an empire I never asked for, built entirely around protecting myself because I believed I had nothing else worth protecting. That changed the moment I held Sophia in my arms. If something happens to me tonight, I need to know I did everything possible to ensure she grows up safe, loved, and free from the kind of fear that defined my entire childhood." Elena's tears fell freely now, her hands gripping his wrists as if she could physically anchor him in place. "I can't lose you," she whispered. "Not now. Not after finally understanding what we could have been." "You won't lose me," Adrian said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I promise you, Elena, whatever happens tonight, I am fighting my way back to both of you." The meeting location Vanessa specified turned out to be an abandoned warehouse near the harbor, isolated, dimly lit, exactly the kind of setting designed to unsettle even a man as composed as Adrian Valenti. He arrived exactly on time, unarmed as instructed, though Dominic's men maintained distant surveillance, despite Vanessa's explicit warning against bringing backup. Vanessa stood waiting in the center of the empty space. Elegant, despite the industrial surroundings, a calm, satisfied expression settled across her features that Adrian found more unsettling than any display of anger could have been. "You came alone," Vanessa said, something almost approving in her tone. "I wasn't entirely certain you would. You didn't leave me much choice," Adrian said, his voice carefully controlled despite the fury simmering beneath the surface. "Say what you need to say, Vanessa. I don't have patience for games tonight." "Games?" Vanessa repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Is that what you think this is, a game, Adrian? I spent 3 years of my life building a future with you. 3 years believing we were building something permanent, something real. And the moment I stopped being useful to your ambitions, you discarded me without a second thought. That's not what happened, Adrian said. I ended our engagement because I realized we wanted fundamentally different things. You wanted power and status. I wanted something I couldn't even name at the time, but I knew I wasn't finding it with you. And you found it with her instead? Vanessa said, venom creeping into her voice. A medical assistant, Adrian. A nobody I handpicked specifically because I understood exactly what kind of woman might finally break through those walls you kept around everyone else. I gave her to you, and instead of gratitude, instead of understanding what I sacrificed to give you that opportunity, you built an entire life with her while I watched from the shadows, forgotten completely. The confession hit Adrian with the full weight of its horrifying implications. You're saying you wanted this, he said slowly. You're saying you wanted me to fall in love with someone else. I wanted you to understand what real connection felt like. Vanessa said, tears unexpectedly filling her eyes, the first genuine emotion Adrian had witnessed from her in this entire encounter. I thought if you experienced that with someone, I trusted someone, I controlled eventually, you would return to me with a new appreciation for what we could build together. I never imagined you would fall so completely that there would be no room left for me at all. So this entire nightmare threatening my daughter working with Bellini, all of this stems from jealousy. Adrian's voice rose with disbelief and fury. You're willing to kidnap an innocent child because your plan to manipulate my emotions backfired. Don't you dare judge me, Vanessa hissed, her composure cracking completely. You have no idea what it feels like to watch the person you love build an entire life with someone else using a strategy you personally orchestrated. I gave you Elena, Adrian. I made this family possible, and you owe me for that gift. I owe you nothing, Adrian said coldly. And Sophia is not a debt to be collected. She's my daughter, and I will burn down everything you and Bellini have built before I let either of you touch her. Vanessa's expression shifted instantly. Calculation replacing raw emotion with unsettling speed. Then perhaps you should know something else, she said, her voice regaining its dangerous composure. Marco isn't the only one with resources in this city, Adrian, and your daughter isn't the only leverage available to me. Adrian's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Vanessa smiled, cold and calculated. Elena's mother, she said quietly. Living in Ohio, working a modest job, completely unprotected. I've had eyes on her for exactly the same amount of time I've had eyes on Elena. If Sophia proves too difficult to reach, there are other pressure points available to convince you both to cooperate. The threat landed like a physical blow, and Adrian's carefully maintained control finally shattered completely. If you touch her mother, if you touch anyone connected to this family, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life regretting every decision that led you to this moment. Big words for a man standing alone in an empty warehouse, Vanessa said, though something flickered nervously behind her eyes at the raw fury in Adrian's voice. I'm not as alone as you think, Adrian said quietly, and as if summoned by his words, the warehouse doors opened suddenly. Dominic and 4 armed men entering with weapons raised, having tracked the meeting despite Vanessa's warnings. Vanessa's composure finally broke completely. You brought them anyway? She said, panic edging into her voice for the first time. You were supposed to come alone. I lied, Adrian said simply. Something I imagine you understand quite well, given how thoroughly you've deceived everyone in your life for years. Vanessa's eyes darted toward the exits, calculating her chances, but Dominic's men had already secured every possible escape route. This isn't over, Vanessa said, desperation creeping into her voice, despite her attempt at composure. Even if you take me right now, Marco still has resources, still has plans in motion that you don't fully understand. Then you're going to tell me exactly what those plans are? Adrian said, moving closer, his voice dropping into something dangerously quiet. Right now, or I promise you whatever consequences you were expecting from this situation will feel like mercy compared to what happens if my daughter is harmed, because you refuse to cooperate. Vanessa's resolve finally crumbled entirely under the weight of Adrian's fury and the armed men surrounding her. "Marco has a secondary team," she admitted quickly. "Independent of the men you've already identified. They've been positioned near Sophia's original daycare for the past week, waiting for an opportunity if the primary plan failed." Adrian's heart stopped. "The daycare Elena stopped using weeks ago." "Marco doesn't know that," Vanessa said. "His surveillance was outdated. He still believes that's where you'll eventually return." Relief flooded through Adrian momentarily before a new, more urgent realization crashed through him. If his information is outdated, if he still believes that's a viable target, that means he doesn't yet know how thoroughly we've mobilized against him. "No," Vanessa confirmed. "As far as Marco understands, tonight's meeting was simply about isolating you, about proving my loyalty was worth continued partnership. He doesn't know you've brought backup. He doesn't know the council withdrew protection. He's still operating under the assumption that his original plan remains viable." Adrian's mind raced through the implications with lightning speed. If Bellini remained unaware of how thoroughly his position had deteriorated, that ignorance created an opportunity, a chance to end this conflict decisively before any further harm could reach Elena or Sophia. "Where is he right now?" Adrian demanded. "Where is Bellini planning to be tonight?" Vanessa hesitated, calculation flickering behind her eyes as she weighed her rapidly diminishing options. "Tell me," Adrian said, his voice carrying a lethal edge that finally broke through her remaining resistance completely. "His primary residence," Vanessa said quietly. "He's waiting there for my confirmation that isolating you tonight succeeded. He believes within hours he'll have everything he needs to force your surrender." Adrian turned to Dominic, immediately urgency radiating from every line of his body. "Mobilize everyone. Tonight this ends completely. If Bellini genuinely believes his plan is succeeding, we have a narrow window to end this before he realizes his mistake and adjusts accordingly." "What about her?" Dominic asked, nodding toward Vanessa, still surrounded by armed men. Adrian studied his former fiancée for a long, cold moment, weighing 3 years of complicated history against the magnitude of the danger she had orchestrated against his family. "Take her into custody," Adrian said finally. "She'll answer to the council for violating their most sacred rule. But that judgment isn't mine to deliver personally. Right now my priority is ending the threat that still exists toward my daughter." As Dominic's men secured Vanessa, Adrian's phone buzzed again, this time with a call rather than a message. He answered, immediately recognizing Elena's number. "Adrian." Elena's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Something's wrong here. The security system just flagged movement near the compound's eastern wall, but Dominic's team says none of our people are stationed there." Adrian's blood turned to ice. "Get to the safe room immediately," he said, already moving toward the exit, his mind racing through the horrifying possibility that Bellini had launched a secondary attack, independent of the plan Vanessa had just revealed. "Elena, now don't wait. Don't question it. Just move." "Adrian, I'm scared," Elena admitted, her voice breaking. "What's happening?" "I don't know yet," Adrian said honestly, sprinting toward his vehicle, Dominic and his men following immediately behind. "But I'm coming, Elena. I'm coming right now, and whatever this is, I promise you, I will not let anything happen to either of you." The line went silent for a terrifying moment, before Elena's voice returned quieter, steadier, despite the obvious fear still evident beneath her words. "Sophia's awake," she said. "She's asking for you." The simple statement hit Adrian harder than any threat Vanessa or Bellini had made throughout this entire nightmare, a reminder of exactly what he was fighting to protect, exactly what mattered more than empire, more than power, more than anything he had spent his entire adult life building. "Tell her I'm coming," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion, despite the danger propelling him forward. "Tell her Daddy's coming home right now." He ended the call and pushed his driver faster every second, stretching into agonizing uncertainty as the compound came into view, security lights illuminating the grounds. Armed men positioned along every visible perimeter point, the entire building bracing for a threat that had somehow slipped past every safeguard Adrian believed he had established. As his car screeched to a halt outside the main entrance, Adrian's phone buzzed one final time, a message that stopped his heart completely as he read it in the harsh glow of his screen. "We're already inside, Adrian. You should have paid closer attention to who else had access to your security codes." The message wasn't from Vanessa. It wasn't from Marco Bellini. It came from a number Adrian didn't recognize at all, and as he stared at those words sprinting toward the entrance with a terror more absolute than anything he had experienced in 15 years of dangerous, violent living, one horrifying question consumed every rational thought remaining in his mind. If Vanessa had been captured and Bellini remained unaware, his plan had already collapsed, then who exactly was already inside his compound, and how long had they been waiting for exactly this moment to strike? Adrian burst through the compound's main doors with Dominic and 4 armed men at his back, every nerve in his body screaming with a terror he hadn't felt since he was a boy, hiding from his own father's rage. The hallways were eerily quiet security lights, casting long shadows across empty corridors that should have been crawling with his men. "Where is everyone?" Adrian demanded, his voice echoing off the walls. Dominic's radio crackled uselessly, static, answering every attempt at contact. "Something's jamming our communications," he said grimly. This wasn't random, Adrian. Whoever's inside knew exactly how to isolate us. They reached the reinforced lower level within minutes, and Adrian's heart nearly stopped at what he found. The steel door to the safe room stood open slightly ajar. A single guard slumped unconscious against the wall beside it. "Elena." Adrian's voice tore through the silence, raw with a fear he had never allowed himself to feel this completely. "Elena." Silence answered him. He pushed through the door, and for one horrifying second, the room appeared empty. The portable crib overturned a small stuffed rabbit, lying abandoned on the floor where Sophia had been playing only minutes earlier. "No." Adrian whispered the word, breaking apart in his throat. "No, no, no. Adrian?" Elena's voice came from behind a fallen shelving unit in the corner, shaking breathless. "Adrian, we're here!" Relief crashed through him so violently, his knees nearly buckled. He rounded the shelving unit to find Elena crouched low. Sophia clutched protectively against her chest, both of them trembling, but unharmed. "What happened?" Adrian dropped to his knees beside them, his hands moving over Sophia's small body, checking for injury, with a desperation that betrayed exactly how close he had come to losing everything. "2 men," Elena said, her voice shaking violently. "They came through the ventilation system, Adrian. They knew the layout, knew exactly where the cameras couldn't reach. I heard them coming, and I hit us before they could—" Her voice broke completely. "Before they could what?" Adrian's voice hardened instantly. "One of them said they only needed the girl," Elena whispered, horror still fresh in her eyes. "He said Marco wanted her alive, that killing me wasn't part of the plan unless I fought back." Dominic, standing guard at the door, cursed under his breath. This wasn't Bellini's standard crew. This was a specialized extraction team. Someone gave them detailed architectural plans of this compound. "Where are they now?" Adrian demanded. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I heard them searching, getting closer, and then suddenly they just left. I don't understand why they gave up so easily." Adrian's mind raced through the possibilities, and horrifying clarity struck him almost instantly. "They didn't give up," he said grimly. "They realized we were coming back faster than expected. Or they got what they actually needed and retreated before we arrived." "What they needed?" Elena's face paled. "Adrian, what are you saying?" Before Adrian could answer, one of the armed men rushed into the room, his face pale with urgency. "Adrian, you need to see the security footage from the server room. Now." They gathered around a monitor moments later, watching grainy footage time-stamped from 12 minutes earlier. 2 men in tactical gear moved through the compound server room with practiced efficiency, bypassing security systems that should have been impossible to circumvent, and extracting a small data drive from the primary server before disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. "They weren't after Sophia at all," Dominic said slowly, disbelief evident in his voice. This entire breach threatening Elena in the safe room that was a distraction. For what? Elena asked, still holding Sophia so tightly the toddler had begun to whimper against the pressure. Adrian's expression turned to stone as understanding crashed over him completely. For this, he said, gesturing toward the empty server slot on screen. That drive contains every financial record, every operational detail, every piece of leverage I've accumulated against every family in this city over 15 years. If that falls into the wrong hands, Bellini gets everything he needs to destroy you completely. Dominic finished grimly. Not just personally, professionally. He could use that information to turn every ally you have against you. Elena's breath caught. So Sophia was never truly the primary target tonight. She was leverage, Adrian said quietly. A threat significant enough to guarantee my complete attention, my complete panic, while the actual operation happened somewhere I wasn't watching closely enough. The weight of the realization settled over the room like a physical presence. For weeks, Adrian had believed he was protecting his family from a straightforward threat, a rival seeking to use his daughter as leverage. But the sophistication of tonight's operation revealed something far more calculated, far more dangerous than a simple kidnapping attempt. We need to move immediately, Dominic said. If Bellini gets his hands on that drive, we have hours at most before he weaponizes everything on it. Adrian stood, his expression hardening into the cold, calculating resolve that had built an empire from nothing. Then we don't give him hours, he said. We end this tonight completely before he has the chance to use anything on that drive against us. Adrian, you can't just charge into his territory, Elena said, panic edging back into her voice. That's exactly what he wants, isn't it, to provoke you into making a reckless move? I'm not going to be reckless, Adrian said, kneeling in front of her again, his hands finding hers gently despite the urgency propelling every other part of him forward. But Elena, I am going to end this tonight one way or another. I refuse to spend the rest of our lives waiting for the next attack, the next threat, the next moment when I have to watch you and Sophia hide behind overturned furniture praying you survive. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Exhaustion and terror finally breaking through the strength she had maintained throughout this endless, terrifying night. Then let me help, she said. I'm not asking permission, Adrian. I'm telling you I want to be part of ending this. Elena, I mean it, she said firmly, her voice steadying despite the tears still on her cheeks. I spent 3 years working inside your world. I know how these men think, how they operate. I am not going to sit here helplessly while you walk into danger, not after everything we've survived tonight. Adrian studied her for a long moment, torn between the desperate need to protect her completely and the growing understanding that Elena Moretti was not a woman who could be protected by exclusion, only by trust. Okay, he said finally. But Sophia stays here with maximum security, with Dominic personally overseeing her protection. Agreed, Elena said immediately. Dominic's expression shifted with genuine hurt. Adrian, after everything tonight, you still trust me with her safety. I trust you made a mistake 3 years ago, Adrian said honestly. Tonight you brought backup to that warehouse despite Vanessa's explicit warning, which likely saved my life. I need you here, Dominic, protecting the one thing that matters more than anything else in this world. Prove tonight that 15 years of loyalty means something. Dominic's eyes glistened with unexpected emotion. I won't fail you again, he said quietly. I promise you that. 20 minutes later, Adrian and Elena sat together in the back of an armored vehicle moving through the city toward Marco Bellini's primary residence, a fortified estate on the outskirts of the city that had remained untouchable for years due to careful alliances and overwhelming security. Tell me your plan, Elena said, steadying her nerves with focused determination. Rossi mentioned Bellini's expecting confirmation that Vanessa successfully isolated me, Adrian said. He believes his men are still searching for that data drive, unaware we've already discovered the breach. If we move quickly enough, we arrive before he realizes his extraction team retreated without completing whatever secondary objective they might have had. And if he does realize, then we adapt, Adrian said grimly. But Elena, there's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. Elena's stomach tightened with new dread. What is it? The council granted permission to move against Bellini directly without protection or repercussion, Adrian said. But that permission requires proof, undeniable proof, that he violated their sacred rule regarding children. Tonight in that compound, when his men threatened you and Sophia, our security cameras captured everything. You're going to use that footage against him publicly, Elena realized. I'm going to make sure every family in this city understands exactly what kind of man Marco Bellini has become, Adrian confirmed. Not just through violence, Elena, through complete exposure. By tomorrow morning, every ally he has left will understand that targeting children makes him a liability. None of them can afford to protect any longer. The vehicle slowed as they approached Bellini's estate, imposing iron gates, illuminated by security lights, armed guards visible along the perimeter walls. Adrian's phone buzzed with a message from Rossi, the contact he had turned during their earlier operation. Bellini's growing impatient. He hasn't heard from the extraction team in 20 minutes. If you're planning something, now is the time. Adrian showed the message to Elena, whose expression hardened with resolve. Then let's give him something to be impatient about. What followed was not a violent siege, not the kind of bloody confrontation that had defined so many conflicts in Adrian's 15 years of ruling New York's underworld. Instead, Adrian approached the gates alone, unarmed, his hands visible, while Elena remained hidden in the vehicle, with Dominic's most trusted men standing guard. I'm here to speak with Marco Bellini, Adrian announced to the guards at the gate, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who had commanded fear for 15 years. Tell him Adrian Valenti has information about his extraction team that he needs immediately. The guards exchanged uncertain glances before one disappeared inside, returning minutes later with visible reluctance. Mr. Bellini will see you, alone. Adrian was led through the estate's grand entrance into a study filled with expensive art and imposing furniture. Finding Marco Bellini, seated behind a heavy oak desk, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious surprise at Adrian's unexpected arrival. This is either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, Marco said, gesturing for Adrian to sit, though Adrian remained standing. Walking into my home alone, Adrian, after everything that's happened tonight. Your extraction team failed, Adrian said, cutting directly through any pretense of civility. They retrieved a data drive, yes, but they left behind security footage capturing every threat they made against my daughter and her mother. Marco's composure flickered slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult both of us by pretending, Adrian said. I know about Vanessa. I know about the debt she manufactured connecting Elena to this entire operation. I know your men threatened to take my 2-year-old daughter tonight, and I have that entire confrontation documented in high-definition footage that I intend to present to the council within the hour. Marco's expression finally cracked calculation, replacing false confidence. The council already withdrew protection based on suspicion, he said carefully. Evidence changes nothing that hasn't already happened. Evidence changes everything, Adrian said coldly. Suspicion allows families to remain neutral, uncertain whether to fully commit against you. Undeniable proof that you personally sanctioned an operation targeting a child eliminates any remaining hesitation. By tomorrow morning, Marco, every family who has ever done business with you will understand exactly what you've become, and they will not simply withdraw support. They will actively work to ensure you never threaten their own children through the precedent you've established. The weight of Adrian's words settled visibly over Marco's expression, understanding dawning that his carefully constructed plan had collapsed far more completely than he had initially realized. What do you want, Adrian? Marco asked, finally, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. You didn't come here simply to threaten exposure. You came with a proposition. I want the data drive returned immediately, Adrian said. I want Vanessa's full confession regarding her role in orchestrating this entire conspiracy, which I already have secured through her capture earlier tonight. And I want your public acknowledgement before the full council that you violated their most sacred rule, an acknowledgement that will end your standing in this city permanently. You're asking me to destroy myself, Marco said. I'm asking you to accept consequences for choices you made freely, Adrian corrected. The alternative, Marco, is that I release everything I know publicly regardless of your cooperation, and you spend whatever time you have left constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for retaliation from every family whose trust you violated by proving children are acceptable targets in your world. Marco's hands trembled slightly as the full weight of his situation crystallized completely. And if I cooperate, if I return everything and confess before the council, then you leave this city tonight, Adrian said, permanently. You disappear into whatever life remains available to a man who has lost every alliance, every resource, every shred of power he once commanded. But you leave breathing Marco, which is considerably more mercy than you extended toward my daughter. The silence stretched long and heavy between them. Marco Bellini weighing decades of ambition against the devastating reality Adrian had just presented. The drive is in my private safe, Marco said finally. Defeat evident in every word. I'll have it returned within the hour. And Vanessa's confession will be presented to the council alongside everything else, Adrian confirmed. This ends tonight, Marco, completely. As Adrian turned to leave, satisfaction mixing with lingering exhaustion from everything the night had demanded, Marco's voice stopped him at the door. You should know something, Marco said quietly. Vanessa wasn't working alone in orchestrating this entire scheme. She had help identifying Elena's connection to Marcus, help understanding exactly how to manipulate the situation into something usable against you. Adrian's stomach tightened with new suspicion. What kind of help? Someone inside your own organization provided background information Vanessa couldn't have accessed independently, Marco said. I don't know who specifically, but I know the information was detailed enough that it had to come from someone with intimate knowledge of your operations. The revelation hit Adrian with fresh urgency, immediately recalling Dominic's earlier admission about recruiting Elena based on Vanessa's suggestion. Had there been more to that betrayal than a simple lapse in judgment? I need you to be more specific, Adrian demanded. I don't have more specifics, Marco said, honestly, exhaustion evident in his own voice now. Vanessa handled that side of the operation independently. All I know is someone close to you helped make this entire scheme possible. Adrian left the estate with new urgency propelling him forward, his mind racing through every trusted associate, every person with access to the kind of intimate operational knowledge Marco had described. By the time he reached the vehicle where Elena waited, his expression had shifted from cautious victory to renewed alarm. What happened? Elena asked immediately, reading the tension in his face. Bellini's agreeing to cooperate, Adrian said. But Elena, he mentioned someone inside my organization helped Vanessa orchestrate this entire scheme. Someone with detailed knowledge of my operations that Vanessa couldn't have accessed independently. Elena's face paled. Dominic. I don't know for certain, Adrian admitted. But we need to get back to the compound immediately. If there's still a threat inside my own organization, Sophia isn't as safe as we believe. The drive back to the compound felt endless, every minute stretching with unbearable tension as Adrian's mind raced through 15 years of trusted relationships, searching for any hint of betrayal he might have overlooked. When they finally arrived, Adrian moved through the compound with barely controlled urgency, finding Dominic exactly where he had left him, standing guard outside the room where Sophia slept peacefully, completely unaware of the danger that had continued unfolding around her throughout the night. Is everything all right? Dominic asked, noting Adrian's tense expression immediately. Bellini mentioned someone inside my organization helped Vanessa orchestrate this entire conspiracy, Adrian said directly, watching Dominic's face carefully for any flicker of guilt or deception. Someone with intimate knowledge of my operations. Dominic's expression shifted through several emotions, rapidly surprise, concern, and finally, something that looked remarkably like relief. I think I might know who that is, he said slowly. Adrian. When I mentioned Vanessa recommended Elena's recruitment 3 years ago, I didn't mention that I discussed the decision with someone else at the time, seeking a second opinion before finalizing her hire. Who? Adrian demanded. Falcone, Dominic said. The council member who questioned your evidence earlier today. He was newer to leadership at the time, eager to build relationships across different families. I mentioned Elena's potential hire during a casual conversation, never imagining it carried any significance beyond routine business. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Falcone's skepticism during the council meeting, his obvious dislike of Adrian, his connections across multiple families that could have facilitated information sharing between Vanessa and Bellini's operation. Falcone has been feeding information to both Vanessa and Bellini, Adrian said slowly, the full scope of the conspiracy finally becoming clear. He's been positioning himself against me for years, using this conflict as an opportunity to weaken my standing within the council. It would explain his resistance to withdrawing protection from Bellini, Dominic said. He wasn't simply questioning your evidence out of caution. He was protecting an ally. Adrian's phone buzzed with an incoming call, Salvatore Greco's name displaying on the screen. He answered immediately, tension coiling through his entire body. Adrian. Salvatore's voice carried unusual urgency. I need you to come to the council chambers immediately. Something has happened that requires your presence. What's happened? Adrian asked. Marco Bellini arrived 20 minutes ago requesting emergency audience, Salvatore said. He's presenting evidence of his own Adrian evidence, suggesting collaboration between one of our own council members and outside criminal elements. I think you need to hear this directly. Adrian's mind raced. Bellini, having agreed to cooperation and exposure just an hour earlier, was apparently attempting to salvage some portion of his standing by exposing Falcone's involvement, perhaps hoping to demonstrate value to the council, even as his own reputation collapsed. I'm on my way, Adrian said, ending the call, and turning immediately to Elena. This might finally be the moment everything gets resolved completely. I'm coming with you, Elena said firmly, no hesitation in her voice. Elena, the council chambers aren't exactly welcoming to outsiders. I don't care, Elena said. I have spent this entire night hiding, protecting, reacting to threats orchestrated against my daughter. I want to be present when the people responsible finally face consequences for what they've done. Adrian studied her determined expression, recognizing the same fierce resolve that had first captured his attention in that clinic 2 years earlier, and nodded. Okay, he said. Let's finish this together. The council chamber buzzed with tension. When they arrived, 12 powerful family leaders gathered once again. Marco Bellini standing before them, looking considerably diminished from the confident man Adrian had confronted just hours earlier. Adrian, Salvatore said as they entered, gesturing toward 2 empty seats near the front. Marco has been presenting quite a story. Falcone sat rigid among the council members, his expression carefully controlled, despite the obvious tension radiating from his posture. Continue, Salvatore instructed Marco. I've already agreed to withdraw from this city entirely to return everything stolen from Adrian's operation and to confess my role in tonight's events. Marco said, his voice heavy with defeat. But I won't be the only one held accountable. Falcone provided detailed operational information about Adrian's security protocols, information that made tonight's extraction possible. He's been working with Vanessa for months, feeding her intelligence in exchange for promised influence once I successfully weakened Adrian's standing. Every eye in the room turned toward Falcone, whose composure finally shattered completely under the collective weight of accusatory stares. This is preposterous, Falcone stammered. You're taking the word of a man already exposed as a criminal targeting children, believing his desperate attempts to shift blame onto innocent parties. Are you willing to have your financial records examined? Salvatore asked coldly. Are you willing to have your recent communications reviewed by this council? Because if Marco's accusations prove false, I will personally ensure his punishment reflects the severity of a false accusation against a fellow council member. But if they prove true, Falcone, you understand exactly what consequences await someone who conspired against a child within this council's protection. Falcone's face drained of color completely, and in that silence, his guilt became undeniable to everyone present. I never intended for the child to actually be harmed. Falcone finally admitted, his voice barely audible. I simply wanted Adrian weakened, wanted his standing diminished enough that my own family's influence could expand. I never imagined Vanessa and Marco would actually attempt kidnapping. You provided the exact information that made the attempt possible, Adrian said, standing his voice carrying across the chamber with lethal calm. Ignorance of consequences doesn't erase responsibility for enabling them. The council's judgment came swiftly and severely. Falcone stripped of his position and standing facing exile from the only world he had ever known, his betrayal ensuring no family would ever trust him again. Marco Bellini's confession, combined with returned assets and public acknowledgement of his crimes, secured him nothing more than permission to leave the city alive, a mercy Adrian had promised and intended to honor completely. Vanessa's fate delivered separately before a smaller gathering, given her lack of official standing within any family, resulted in permanent exile from every territory controlled by the council. Her name marked as untouchable across every family's operations, ensuring she would never again possess the resources or connections necessary to threaten anyone Adrian loved. As the council meeting concluded, Salvatore approached Adrian and Elena, his expression softening from formal authority into something more personal. "You handled tonight with more wisdom than many men twice your age," Salvatore said. "Your father would have simply eliminated everyone involved without hesitation. You found justice within our system, instead protecting your family while maintaining the structure that keeps this world from collapsing into pure chaos. I learned that lesson the hard way," Adrian admitted. "Tonight taught me things about myself I never expected to discover." Salvatore's eyes moved to Elena, warmth entering his weathered expression. "And you, my dear, showed remarkable courage tonight. Not many people would willingly walk into a room full of powerful men to witness justice delivered on behalf of their child. She's worth every risk," Elena said simply, and Adrian felt something warm bloom in his chest at the quiet conviction in her voice. They returned to the compound as dawn began breaking over the city, exhaustion finally catching up with both of them after a night that had tested every limit of their strength and resolve. Dominic met them at the entrance, relief evident across his features. "She's still asleep," he said. "Peaceful the entire time you were gone." Elena moved immediately toward the private quarters, needing to see her daughter, to hold her, to confirm with her own eyes that the nightmare had truly ended. Adrian followed close behind, watching as Elena gently lifted their sleeping daughter into her arms. Sophia stirring slightly, but remaining peacefully unaware of everything her parents had endured to protect her. "It's over," Elena whispered, tears finally falling freely as the accumulated terror of the entire ordeal released completely. "Adrian, it's actually over." "It's over," Adrian confirmed, wrapping his arms around both of them, holding his family close with a tenderness that would have seemed impossible to anyone who had only known him as the ruthless king of New York's underworld. The following weeks brought changes neither Elena nor Adrian could have anticipated just months earlier. Adrian began systematically restructuring his organization, distancing legitimate business interests from the more dangerous elements of his inherited empire, determined to build something safer, something Sophia could eventually understand without shame or fear. He attended every doctor's appointment Elena scheduled for Sophia's routine checkups, sitting in waiting rooms alongside ordinary parents, learning an entirely different kind of patience than the one required to command fear and respect within his previous world. He learned to prepare simple meals, burning his first 3 attempts at pancakes before finally mastering a recipe Sophia declared her favorite. He spent hours reading parenting books late into the night, determined to break every pattern his own father had established, determined to build something entirely different for his daughter. "You don't have to learn everything overnight," Elena told him one evening, watching him carefully assemble a crib from complicated instructions, muttering under his breath at pieces that refused to fit together properly. "I have 2 years to make up for," Adrian said, though his voice carried more warmth than urgency now. "I intend to spend every single day proving I deserve the chance you've given me." Elena settled onto the floor beside him, taking the confusing instruction manual from his hands. "You already have," she said quietly. "Adrian, watching you with her these past weeks, watching how patient you are, how gentle, how completely different from everything I feared when I first learned I was pregnant. That's proof enough." I still worry, Adrian admitted. I worry I'll fail her the way my father failed me. I worry that despite everything I'm trying to change, some part of that legacy will find its way into how I raise her. You won't fail her, Elena said firmly. Because unlike your father, you're aware of the danger, actively fighting against it every single day. That awareness alone makes you completely different from the man who raised you. Their relationship rebuilt from fear and secrecy into something far more honest, continued evolving with a foundation neither of them had experienced before, built on transparency, rather than assumption, on partnership, rather than unilateral protection. I don't need you to shield me from every difficult decision, Elena told him during one particularly heated discussion about expanding security measures around Sophia's future school enrollment. I need you to discuss decisions with me, to trust my judgment as an equal partner in raising our daughter. You're right, Adrian said, and the willingness to acknowledge this, to adjust his instinctive need for control, represented growth that surprised even Elena with its consistency. I'm still learning how to balance protection with partnership. Be patient with me while I figure this out. I intend to be, Elena said, smiling despite the seriousness of their conversation, for as long as it takes. 3 months after the confrontation that had nearly destroyed everything, Adrian organized a small gathering. Nothing like the elaborate gala where their story had first taken its complicated turn, but something quieter, more intimate, celebrating Sophia's second birthday, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being, rather than political alliances or business obligations. Dominic attended, his relationship with Adrian gradually rebuilding through consistent loyalty and transparency that slowly restored the trust damaged by his earlier oversight. Salvatore Greco made a brief appearance, presenting Sophia with a small, thoughtful gift and offering Elena genuine warmth that reflected the respect he had developed for her strength throughout the entire ordeal. Watching Sophia laugh as she opened presents surrounded by people who had fought fiercely to protect her existence, Elena felt something settle completely within her chest, a peace she hadn't experienced in the 2 years since discovering her pregnancy, since choosing silence. Out of fear, since building an entire life around protecting a secret that had ultimately united rather than destroyed the family she never imagined possible. Thank you, she said quietly to Adrian, watching their daughter delightedly examine a new stuffed animal. For what? Adrian asked, his arm settling naturally around her shoulders. For fighting for us, Elena said. For choosing us even when everything about your world suggested walking away would have been easier, safer, less complicated. Adrian turned to face her fully, his expression carrying the same intensity she had first noticed months earlier in that clinic when a dangerous, feared man had shown vulnerability nobody believed him capable of possessing. You and Sophia aren't complications, Elena, he said quietly. You're the reason everything else finally makes sense. 15 years I built an empire believing power and fear were the only currencies that mattered in this world. It took holding my daughter for the first time to understand I had built my entire life around exactly the wrong priorities. And now? Elena asked softly. Now I understand that real strength isn't measured by how many people fear you, Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion he no longer felt the need to hide. It's measured by how fiercely you're willing to protect the people who matter most, and how completely you're willing to change everything about yourself to become someone worthy of that protection. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, they were tears of overwhelming happiness rather than fear. Sophia toddled over at that moment, holding up her new stuffed animal for both parents to admire, completely unaware that her simple existence had triggered a war, exposed years of hidden betrayal, and ultimately transformed one of the most feared men in New York into someone capable of profound tenderness. Adrian scooped her into his arms, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, and Elena watched the scene with a certainty that had taken 2 years of fear, secrecy, and finally courage to fully believe. Adrian Valenti had conquered rival families, defeated countless threats, and built an empire respected and feared throughout the city. But holding his daughter close, surrounded by the family he never believed he deserved, he understood with absolute certainty that his greatest victory had nothing to do with power or territory, or fear. It was choosing love, even when everything in his past had taught him love was a weakness to be avoided rather than a strength to be embraced. A single hidden ultrasound had almost kept this family apart, forever buried beneath fear and misunderstanding, that nearly cost them everything before they ever had the chance to become who they were always meant to be. But truth, however painful, however dangerous the path toward revealing it, had ultimately given Adrian, Elena, and Sophia something far more valuable than the secrets that once separated them. It gave them each other completely and unconditionally, a family forged through fire, and finally strong enough to face whatever the future demanded of them together. And in that truth, in that hard-won, unbreakable bond between a father who learned to love without fear and a mother who learned to trust without losing herself, their story found not just an ending, but a beginning that would last for the rest of their lives.